Well, good morning and welcome to the Chamber's Federal Legislative Summit. I'm Wendy Birdsall. I'm the president of the Lincoln Chamber of Commerce, and we really have a great premier event for you today. I believe this is the 7th year that we've done this and gathered, and I tell you what, this is probably one of the best lineups that we've had. I want to take a minute to recognize our sponsors. They'll be scrolling on the screens next to you here. Without their commitment to our events, we wouldn't be able to bring such a quality event to you, wouldn't be able to bring an event to you at all. So I'd like to acknowledge those sponsors if we could. And I hope you all got a chance to network. One of the purposes of our event is to bring folks in. This, as I said, this is the 7th year we've committed to this and in partnership with the Nebraska Chamber of Commerce. And I want to thank Barry and his crew for being willing to do this as in a joint group. It really is a great way to kind of integrate our two organizations and integrate our membership so that you can network and meet some new folks. Thanks, Barry.
Thank you, Wendy. I'm Barry Kennedy, President of the Nebraska Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and on behalf of our Board of Directors and Chris Roth with Reineke Manufacturer, our chairman this year, and a number of other board members are here, I too want to welcome you to our 6th Annual Federal Legislative Summit. The reality is that federal issues are becoming more central to the everyday affairs of the business community, demanding more time and attention dealing with the regulatory oversight. Fortunately, Nebraska's delegation, federal delegation, is, I believe, the most accessible and the most business-friendly delegation in America. I just returned last night from one of my national meetings, and in visiting with my counterparts, they are just amazed that we were going to be able to have our entire delegation in one location here this morning, and they're all wanting to know how they do that. We are pleased that our federal delegation has made this event their first stop, so to speak, for their August recess period. We're also excited to have several U.S. Senate and gubernatorial candidates joining us today for a candidates forum. It's going to be a rather packed agenda, but we'll work through it. We all know the critical role that elected leaders play in setting policy, which can either help or hinder business and your ability to grow our economy. Today will be a unique opportunity to hear directly from all the key candidates for two very important offices, as well as our current delegation.
When we culminate that, we'll go into lunch, and then we'll have an excellent keynote speaker for our lunch. My good friend Rob Engstrom, who is the Senior Vice President with the U.S. Chamber. He is their national political. I need one more cup of coffee. Could somebody grab me one? Rob Engstrom. He's the Senior Vice President with the U.S. Chamber. He is their National Political Director for them. He will do some political prognosticating for us on U.S. and House Senate seats and give us a flavor for how the U.S. Chamber engages in federal elections on behalf of its business members. But before we get to that congressional report, I'd like to ask Senator Mike Johans, to come and join us up here on stage. Not sure he knows what we're going to do, so don't ever anybody tell him. In that this is our, we've done this multiple events, and our delegation has been so gracious in coming to this particular event, but it will be the last one we will do while he is still a senator. So we thought we should take an opportunity to acknowledge his 32 years of honorable and exemplary public service. And as a small sub-note here, when I first started at the chamber, which I was 11 years old at that time, he was the mayor of Lincoln, and he helped create, actually it was his brainchild to create the Lincoln Partnership for Economic Development. And the Lincoln Partnership for Economic Development has really played a tremendous role in the development of our capital city. So I'd like to thank him for that, but before I do that, I'm going to let Barry thank you as well.
You want to hold that? Don't drop it.
I won't.
It is indeed our honor, Senator Johans, to present you with an award to recognize the extraordinary service that you have provided to the citizens serving in such prominent positions as U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, where you made us all proud, obviously U.S. Senator, and of course, I still have fond memories of traveling virtually all over the world with Governor Johanns, who I can assure you everywhere we went, you would be proud to be a Nebraskan when Mike Johanns was representing you. Senator Johanns, we thank you for the service you have given this state.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh. Great. Well, thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you. I often tell a story about soon after I was elected governor, but before I was sworn in, I went to Kearney, Nebraska to speak to an ag group, and I get this very warm welcome, great introduction and all of that, and as I'm making my way to the podium, everybody stood up and applauded, and I got to the podium and I said, you know, that's really very, very nice of you, but I haven't done anything yet. And somebody in back yelled out, and when you do, we won't be standing. So it's nice after 32 years of doing this to look across this crowd and see so many very, very good friends and supporters who have been a part of that life. Stephanie and I say to each other, and we say to others, if we had the power to turn back the clock 32 years, we would do it all the same. No question about it. We have loved serving the great people of our state, and we'd love to do it all over again. But of course, time does move on and things change, and we're very excited about what happens next in life. I do want to just wrap up and say thank you for the honor. I hope you know we haven't done these things for awards and honors, but it's very special when you're recognized, and I appreciate that. So we wish you all the very best. God bless you, and thank you for this nice award. Thank you.
You know, we really are truly honored to have such outstanding folks representing us, and it is a true pleasure to be able to honor someone of Senator Johanns' service for his service. So thank you all for helping us recognize that. Next up, we'd like to move on in our program for our congressional report, which Senator Deb Fischer will MC. Senator Fischer is in her second year of serving the people of Nebraska and continues her own strong record of exemplary public service in the U.S. Senate. Please help me welcome Senator Fischer to the podium.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be back home in the state of Nebraska, and it's a great opportunity that we have this morning to visit with people who are interested and involved in all the important issues that affect our state. This year, the guys told me it was going to be my just wonderful opportunity to host the Nebraska breakfast. And then we were asked by the chamber to have our presentation here today kind of like we do at the Nebraska breakfast. I told them they have to behave, but I am not responsible for the comments that they make. So that's always my disclaimer. But as you know, the Nebraska breakfast is a wonderful opportunity when Nebraskans can come out to Washington. We have a breakfast on Wednesday mornings. It gives us the opportunity to reconnect with Nebraskans. It keeps us grounded when we're in Washington, and it lets us be able to know what's on people's minds, while we also let them know what's going on in the House and in the Senate. Usually we run the breakfast by the order that people arrive, and I can tell you that Mike Johanns is always first. And even if he isn't first, I make him first. You know, it has been such an honor for me, such a pleasure, to be able to serve 2 years in the United States Senate with Senator Mike Johans. He has been a friend. We work together just really, really well. Our staff works together very, very well. So I've spent this year at the Nebraska breakfast thanking him and saying goodbye to him. And I would ask you today to also thank him for his years of service to the state of Nebraska. He has always served us with honor and dedication and commitment. And I would once again ask you to please rise and thank Senator Mike Johans.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Thanks. Well, let me again just say thanks. You know, if there was one message today, it would be that. I also want to acknowledge my colleagues in the Nebraska congressional delegation. I don't know in the time that I've been in the Senate that I have seen a senator hit the ground running faster, better than Deb Fisher. It was kind of remarkable to watch. I had this crazy notion that Deb would be in my office every day asking me for my sage advice. Heck, I was getting advice from her, so she's going to be a great senior senator for Nebraska and just doing outstanding work for you. But the rest of our delegation, if you look at the committee assignments for this delegation, you begin to realize that we've got all the key committees, whether it's in the House or the Senate, and it's hard to describe what a difference that makes. And so I'm just proud of all of the work that they do. I wanted to touch on just a couple of things today, and then I'll offer a couple of thoughts on the way forward between now and the end of the year. We wrap up this session, I think formally on January 2nd at midnight. We'll see how long we're in session. I think we're all anticipating a lame duck, and I wanted to visit with you a little bit about that. A lot of things dominating the news today. If you turned on the evening news, you might hear about the Middle East. You might hear about what Putin is doing in the Ukraine and a whole host of issues that arise from that, embargoes and that sort of thing. It's just a very, very chaotic time. And there's also a massive amount of regulatory work that is going on in Washington. One of the issues that we're spending a lot of time on is an issue that's going to affect you very, very personally. And that's what the EPA is doing in terms of carbon. I can assure you beyond any shadow of a doubt that compliance is just going to be expensive. It's not the fault of your local utilities. They're not doing anything wrong. They're just trying to figure out what to do in terms of compliance with EPA mandates and requirements. You'll feel the effects of that because, of course, the cost of that gets passed on. That's just the reality of what we are dealing with. I was in a meeting just a few weeks ago with Gina McCarthy. It was really called to talk about a whole different set of rules, waters of the U.S., but there were some senators in there that wanted to talk to her about the carbon rules, and I walked out. My takeaway was she is not giving an inch. She believes she can regulate in this area. She's going to regulate in this area, and hold on, here it comes. Waters of the U.S. is another major issue that all of a sudden we're dealing with a regulatory approach here that has real consequences. And this is massive. This is the kind of regulatory effort that could have a profound impact on farming and ranching in this country, because theoretically anything could be connected under their rules to waters of the U.S. And again, that's the reality we're dealing with. I asked her during that meeting to pull that rule down and literally start over. because everybody is confused. And the EPA is running around saying, no, that's not what we meant. We didn't intend that. We know that's not what we're going to do. You have nothing to worry about. But what we know happens is that if a rule is put in place over time, different administrations come and go, and they interpret that rule differently and more expansively. It is very, very rare that the federal government will pull in on an interpretation. What typically happens is that interpretation gets broader and broader. So all of a sudden, some farmer who's been farming a piece of land that's near a river is entangled in EPA regulations on how they're going to farm. Some rancher who has had pasture land with the small lakes that we see can all of a sudden find themselves tangled in EPA regulation. Here's a thought I would offer, and that is that I really believe that over the next couple of years, you're going to see a blizzard of regulatory activity. This administration is winding down. I think you will see them issuing a lot more regulation. Final thing I wanted to mention in terms of a today issue is the border issues that we're facing. And I'm hoping Deb will talk more extensively because she was just at the border a couple of weeks ago. But let me, if I might, offer a thought about this. Oftentimes, as the discussion about the unaccompanied minors takes place, you hear reference to a change in the law in 2002 and 2008. Here's what happened. In 2008, the law was changed to provide an exception for unaccompanied minors out of Central America. And basically, the exception was that if a minor came to our border from Central America, they would be treated differently than a minor that came from Canada or a minor that came from Mexico or wherever. They would be taken into custody by Health and Human Services, and Health and Human Services and other federal agencies were directed to develop policies on how they would be handled. So they got a whole host of rights and opportunities that weren't available if you showed up at the border and you were an unaccompanied minor from Mexico or some other part of the world. Now, the interesting thing about that, when that law was passed in 2008, the numbers of unaccompanied minors actually declined for 3 years. So you ask yourself, well, then Mike, how did this come about that all of a sudden we've got all of these unaccompanied minors at our border? Well, something happened in 2012 because the numbers started to spike. Now, this is going to sound overly political, but what happened is you had a gentleman running for president of the United States, and he wanted to solidify his vote, so he announced he wouldn't be enforcing portions of the immigration law. And that young people, often referred to as the dreamers, in effect, would not be put through the system. They would stay. Now, they've interviewed some of these minors from Central America who have ended up on the border, and they've said, what's bringing you here? And what they are saying is they're not mentioning poverty. They're not mentioning crime. They're not mentioning drug gangs. They're mentioning the fact that, you know, we've heard that something changed in the United States, and if we can just get in the country, we won't be sent out of the country. And overwhelmingly, that's what they're saying. Well, never missing the opportunity to build a business enterprise, the cartels and the coyotes have looked at this and said, let's go after this. So they're shaking down families in Central America and saying, pay us $7,000 or $5,000 or $3,000. And we'll take your minor and we'll transport them from Central America up to the border where they will turn themselves in, where then the United States government will take custody and these children will be placed with a family member in the United States. Now, the coyotes and cartels are not honorable business people. And these unaccompanied minors start the trip from hell. They're abused, they're raped, they're not fed, they're not given water. And as long as we as a nation send the message that the coyotes are right, their business will grow. And so this year, some 60,000 unaccompanied minors have come to the border. We anticipate that number will grow to 90 to 100,000. And we have encouraged a business down there that is illegal. It is hurting children, and it is a very, very serious problem. We need policy changes if you're going to impact that, and that's the debate in Washington. Let me just wrap up, talk just very briefly about the lame duck session. No announcement of a lame duck yet, but I think everybody believes there will be a lame duck session. So here's what will happen. We'll go back in September, I think for a couple of weeks, recess until after the election in November. Come back, I don't know, the Monday after the election, maybe it'll be the following Monday. Harry Reid will set that. And then there'll be a list of items that I think will be taken up in the lame duck session. What are those items? Again, that depends on what the majority leader wants to do in the Senate. It depends on how the House handles the lame duck session. But you could see some things like extenders. Some of you are interested in what's happening to this tax provision. It expired, and I think you could see that be a part of the lame duck session. You might see the disability treaty come back if they think they have enough votes. I do not believe they have enough votes. If we deal with the budget in September with a continuing resolution, which I believe we will, that could get kicked off till the lame duck session. So something would have to happen to continue to fund the government. Could be an omnibus budget bill, which is kind of a package of everything in that one bill. I think there'll be judges and appointments. I think that'll be especially true if control shifts from Democrat to Republican. Then I think they'll be working night and day to try to get all the appointments that they can possibly get done. Because keep in mind, Harry Reid broke the rules to change the rules. And now after 200 and some years, we're doing approval of executive branch appointments, federal court lifetime appointments, federal district court judges, and circuit court judges with a majority vote. He has effectively silenced the minority, which happens to be your representatives in the Senate. So a lot depends on what happens in November, but stay tuned. I think we'll be talking to you in November and December about what's going on in the lame duck session. With that, thank you. God bless you. Pleasure to be with you today.
I serve on 5 committees in the United States Senate, and one of those is the Environment and Public Works Committee. Senator Johans mentioned 2 important issues that we're hearing about, and that is the Clean Air Act and the emissions standards that are coming out. And I can let you know that my office and I am working with our public power companies in trying to address that. I sent a letter with Senator Heidi Heitkamp. She's a Democrat from North Dakota, and we were able to get strong support and had 45 co-signers on that letter asking for an extension comment period for that. So we are hopeful, and we are working with our public power districts in order to get some comments out there. Another issue that the Senator mentioned was the waters of the United States, and he emphasized the importance to agriculture, and I know everyone in this room understands the importance of agriculture to the state of Nebraska. It's the economic engine of the state. But it doesn't end there. It affects your businesses. It affects the cities and the counties. I can tell you it affects road building. If there's water in a ditch when roads are being built, that'll be regulated by the federal government. That's an issue that's going to affect every citizen in the state of Nebraska, and we're trying to get that message out there on the costs and the impact that that will have. I was at the border with a group of 5 other senators, a bipartisan group. We were there on Friday. We had the opportunity to be briefed by the Border Patrol, was our first spot. And I can tell you that those individuals are doing their job. They are professional. They aren't as overwhelmed as they were previously by the sheer numbers that were coming over. Sometimes it gets lost in the telling of this horrific story that the number of children coming over and crossing at this border crossing is about 42,000. 75% of those children are males between the age of 14 and 17. The Border Patrol takes special care to interview those young men, to observe them, to look at them to make sure that they are not members of a gang or working for a cartel. They look for tattoos, they look for comments that they make, and if they believe that they are, they remove them from the general population because they want to make sure the other children are safe. But these professionals, the Border Patrol, they've been overwhelmed. Their job is to apprehend, and they were becoming caretakers. And what they were telling us that they needed was the resources so they could build more fence. There is fence along that area, and it does help them. And they have areas that they have targeted where it would be helpful to them to have more fence. And it's in order to slow down people coming in so that they can reach them and apprehend them. I was also able to sit in one of the booths at the Hidalgo Bridge, and where the legal movement between our two countries of Mexico and the United States takes place. It's a very interesting system that they have, and I was especially fascinated to be able to see that firsthand, because when we had the immigration discussion last year in the United States Senate, an amendment that I proposed that was not taken up, it dealt with entry and exit biometrics, to be able to know who's coming in the country and who's leaving the country. And at this certain border crossing, they knew who was coming in. They were able to see the car, the license plate. They were able to see the individuals in the car. They had everybody up on the screen before they ever got to the booth. And things moved pretty well. I mean, there's a huge, huge lineup of cars. But on the exit, they are only able to see the car. So they only know which car is leaving. They don't know who's in it. And as we all know, part of the challenge that we face with immigration and illegal immigration is that 40% of the people who enter this country legally, they overstay. They overstay their visas. And so we are not able to make sure they exit at the time that they are required to do so. Those were two of the things that the Border Patrol suggested to our group of senators that we thought would be helpful as we move forward in trying to address really the whole immigration reform and also the crisis that we're seeing at the border now. When the temperatures cool off a little down at the border, we will see that movement of children again coming in. Although the Border Patrol said that they are hopeful when they're sending children back now that the message will reach Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, don't send your children here. It's a dangerous journey. You are putting your children in jeopardy. You're turning them over, as the senator said, to these cartels, these gangs, who move them step by step, hand them off to another coyote to bring them up. America is a compassionate country. We have over 1 million legal immigrants enter this country every year. That's more than any other nation in the world. We need to address legal immigration and how we can meet the needs of people who want to come to this country and who will help us grow a stronger country as well. But first and foremost, I believe, as well as the colleagues on both sides of the aisle that I was with, that we have to strengthen that border and make sure that safety for our citizens as well as those who are being taken advantage of trying to get into this country is first and foremost. Next, it is my pleasure to introduce to you the Dean of the Nebraska delegation, Lee Terry. As you know, Lee represents the 2nd Congressional District in the Omaha-Sarpy County area. He and I were just out and did a press event on a project that we worked very hard on, a water resources development project, to finish that up for the levees out there by Ashland that protect the drinking water for 2/3 of the state of Nebraska. People in Lincoln and Omaha, that protect the highways, I-80 and Highway 6, that protect our National Guard facility, that protect over 17,000 acres of land and over 400 residential and non-residential structures. This was a very important project. It needed to be completed. I was able to get the wording into the Word bill, it's called, that we passed in the Senate. And we passed it, I'm taking more time, don't show me signs. That we passed in our committee, in the Environment and Public Works Committee, unanimously. And if you look at the makeup of this committee, Barbara Boxer is chairman, and some of the most liberal Democrats in the Senate serve on it, and some of the most conservative Republicans serve on this committee. But yet we were able to come together on infrastructure projects like the Word bill and pass that out of committee unanimously. We were able to pass it overwhelmingly in the Senate. The House passed it with Lee's help. In conference committee, we made sure that that wording stayed in there for this project. So I am just thrilled to have a partner like Lee Terry that we can work with in the House. Ladies and gentlemen, Lee Terry.
Thank you, Deb. That's very kind. She's been a wonderful chairman of our Nebraska breakfast every week, and I knew that she was going to be fair in the way that she treated us. You know, sometimes senators have a reputation of being a little above the House of Lords. But right away she set the tone that it was going to be equal, egalitarian. She said the way that we're going to use the 1 hour is the Senate gets 30 minutes and the House gets 30 minutes. That'll take a little math to get. Well, you're going to hear a theme with all of us here today, and that's the rules and regulations. Frankly, that's what we spent most of our time on in the last year, is dealing with the magnitude of the rules and regulations, because many of these are really deep in how they will affect how business is done, whether it's in agriculture or energy. Now, one of the premises that I work from when I'm looking at these rules and regulations in any piece of legislation is the simple premise of we are in a global economic competition. There's been a feeling since 2008 that maybe we are not as competitive as we used to be. And I think it is incumbent upon all levels of government to make sure that we are putting ourselves on a path to be able to compete, which means that we keep our jobs here, we grow our jobs here, and we don't adopt government policies that are going to make it more difficult for businesses to prosper. The end result of a prosperous economy is that it lifts everybody. That means that we all have, our children will all have opportunities to succeed as any parent wants them to be. So when we look at some of these rules and regulations, as many of you know, I'm on the Energy and Commerce Committee, which is the single most important committee in Congress. Now, Jeff is on Appropriations, or as we call them, De-Appropriations Committee now. and Adrian's on Ways and Means, and they may differ with me. And by the way, this was all part of the teamwork that we're all on the top 3 committees in Congress. Is because we want to be able to represent the state, and we agreed and divvied up the responsibilities and took those 3 committees and worked to get ourselves on those. But I focus on energy, and there's 3 major rules out there, and a couple of them have been discussed a great deal, but I want to brief them on it. First of all, the one that's in the news right now is the greenhouse gas rule that was just proposed or in finalization now regarding power plants, existing power plants. There was already a rule that made it really tougher on emissions that for new built, but now they're going after existing ones. And I'm really concerned about how this affects the state of Nebraska, because what it does is it forces every electrical generator, so Lincoln Electric Systems, OPPD, and I really believe that probably the entities that take the greatest hit and are going to have the most difficulties complying to this rule are going to be our rural generators. Because leave no doubt here, whatever these companies choose to do to comply to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions is going to be costly. And we understand in this room that the cornerstone to a healthy economy, a vibrant economy, is affordable and reliable energy. And I'm telling you here today that both of those are at risk. At the least, it's going to increase, these rules will increase the price of energy throughout the United States. I've done a series of hearings as the chairman of the Commerce, Manufacturing, and Trade Subcommittee. And one of the themes throughout the dozens of witnesses from major industries to smaller industries is that the affordable energy in the United States makes us more competitive in the world market. That our energy is, especially if you use natural gas, 1/3 of the international price, which allows us to bring jobs back to the United States. So when we increase prices and make energy not as available, we're becoming less competitive. But yet when you combine all of these rules, that's exactly what's going to happen. So we have the greenhouse gas rules that are going to drive up prices, no doubt about that. The possibility of unreliability, because if some of these plants in western Nebraska, for example, or in rural areas don't have the money to make the changes, they only have one option: close. And if you don't have another plant to take up the slack there, then you have an unreliable system. We don't want to become a third world country or raise the prices and become less competitive. We've got cross-state pollution. Do you realize that according to the EPA, we are the cause of Milwaukee's pollution? And the Supreme Court just approved or allowed that to stand. So now we have to worry about different types of emissions. There's another one that was put on the shelf that'll be taken back off soon called the ozone rule, where you have to reduce your ozone particulates, which, by the way, according to what the new standard would be, Omaha would be out of the rules. I mean, they'd be found to be non-compliant and would have to be a containment. So would Yellowstone Park, by the way. That's how outrageous these rules are. So when I look at all of these rules, I see that we are being put in an uncompetitive position when we need to be making ourselves more competitive. And by the way, Mike and Deb both brought up the water of the U.S., where the EPA is now trying to really get into your farms, ranches, feedlots. The head of the EPA, Gina McCarthy, was in front of our subcommittee just about a month ago, and I brought this up to her and I asked her point blank, if you're regulating what's happening on our farms, ranches, and feedlots, what would you suggest to a rancher or a feedlot operator on what they can do to comply, and she, without hesitating, said methane digesters. They're all going to need methane digesters to comply. And she was bragging about, like, that's such a great thing, and went on to talk about how then they can create their own electricity and then put it on the grid, and they can get reimbursed for those costs, and it's really great. And I actually had an amendment to encourage methane digesters. Use the key word encourage. This is going to be a compliance issue. And then I let her know, you realize what you do by doing that is consolidate the industries, because there's only going to be a handful that can actually afford to do that. But she thinks that all of our power companies are just going to start putting cash into these methane digesters. So that's the creative thinking coming out of the EPA on this. One last thing I want to talk about, and that's both Mike and Deb have, and it's really on our minds, and that's the crisis that's occurring on our borders right now with the unaccompanied minors or children that are coming over. And we passed a bill in the House giving the president the $600 million that he wanted. We did say that you have to have better border security. You got to increase the number of border control. You've got to reimburse the governors for their National Guard that they've had to use. And I think that was a good bill. It was interesting when I woke up the next morning and turned on Good Morning America at 7 a.m. to learn that Congress had been on vacation and didn't do anything. That was about 12 hours after, that was about 8 hours after the vote we took. But I do want to say, we do have to deal with the immigration issue outside of the border crisis that we're occurring right now. And one of the things that frustrates me on the immigration issue is that it's been an all or nothing proposition. There's actually things in there that I would think that everyone in this room could agree upon, that the Republicans and Democrats agree on, House and the Senate. For example, I think all of us would agree that if you have a bright person from another country that's come to this country and they're got their engineering degree, maybe their master's degrees in STEM and PhDs. Right now our immigration law said that once they finish that education, they have to go back to their country. They're not allowed to stay here. So we are thinking of competition in an economy. We are training the world's best people in STEM and forcing them to go back to China and implement what they've learned instead of us keeping them here. I would think all of us would vote in favor of that, but under the way of the all or nothing approach under Harry Reid, they're not allowing or recognizing those bills that would have the bipartisan support and level. And so I would suggest to my leaders in both sides of the Capitol that we look and focus on those things that really help our country that we all agree in, and let's work on this in a step-by-step process. Then we can get to the really difficult issue in immigration, which is what do we do with the folks here? Do we give them citizenship? Do we give them a different status? Or like some of my colleagues would even say, give them a plane ticket home. At least we can have that debate then. But let's do what we all agree on first. So with that, this has been fun. This is our 6th year of doing the Nebraska Breakfast in Nebraska, sponsored by our chambers, and I just want to thank the chamber for hosting this event and inviting us back.
Thank you, Lee. Great comments. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Congressman Jeff Fortenberry. Jeff represents the 1st Congressional District. He lives in Lincoln, but he also represents rural areas around the eastern part of the state in Lincoln. He didn't bring his charts today, I don't believe. Oh, yeah? I think we did. Oh, yeah. You know, when I attended my first few breakfasts after being sworn in last year, I was kind of appalled that my colleagues were kind of hard on Jeff, and they would beat him up a little bit about the charts that you're just about ready to enjoy. And I thought that's really, really rude, you know, just really rude of them. But I understand now. Jeff serves on the Appropriations Committee, another great committee that our delegation has been assigned to in the House. And he does have some good information on these charts. These are very, very helpful. It shows the money coming in from the taxpayers and how the government spends it. So please welcome Representative Jeff Fortenberry.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you, as always, for your generous introduction, Senator Fisher. Great to see you all. Before I begin, I think it's appropriate for me to also recognize the extraordinary achievements of our United States Senator and an extraordinary public servant, Mike Johans. When I was a much younger man, when I had black hair and he had black hair, I was interested in potentially being on the Lincoln City Council. So I made an appointment to go see Mayor Mike Johans, and I think that was the beginning of a very good and long friendship. And of course, I've watched him serve with extraordinary skill as he moved on to the governorship, then became Secretary of Agriculture. I moved to Congress, was on the Ag Committee. We sat across the table again then, and then he went on to the United States Senate. Mike, thank you for your extraordinary service. I was reflecting on a couple of things on the drive-in this morning, and I enjoy looking at when church communities, they put little sayings on their sign. So I saw one that I thought I'd share with you. God, help me to be the person that my dog thinks I am. I thought it was pretty good, so I've made a note of that. Lee, did you write that down? Yes, okay, good. The second thing I was reflecting on is the wonderful time of the year that we're in now, detasseling in county fair season. This time in which we really do celebrate what it means to be in Nebraska, why this is such a wonderful place to live and to work and raise the family. And thank you all for your contributions, whether or not you're in business or you're in government, for clinging to that ideal in all that you do. I'm very, very grateful. We were riding down, I live in Lincoln, we were riding down 84th Street this morning, and I looked over at the county fair. And I took a couple of my daughters the other night, but I had a little incident a couple years ago I want to share with you. I've done a number of town halls this week across communities, and we'll continue those today. And at the end of the town hall in Lincoln a little while back, I told everyone I really have to go because I promised my teenage daughter that I would take her to the county fair. And I did. Now, when I was growing up, I don't have any brothers. So I never got to go on the rides that flip upside down and all that. And so now that I have teenagers, I thought, really, given my age, this is the last chance to do that. So there was a ride there at the fair called the Kamikaze. And it's one of these things that you get in these little rocket-type ships, and it's on a fulcrum, and it spins, and it hangs upside down, then it tries to come around, and then it finally does. So I looked at it, and I looked at my daughter. I said, Elizabeth, you want to go on that with me? She said, Dad, I don't think that's a good idea. Her friend, Alexandra, said, Congressman, I'll go with you. Well, I walked over to the attendant, and I told him, I'm 51 years old. Can I handle this? He said, I'm 53. I said, you didn't answer my question. He said, I think you can handle it. Elizabeth said, Dad, I don't think this is a good idea. Alexandra said, Congressman, I'll go with you. So wanting to get this off the bucket list, we strapped ourselves in, and it starts to swing, and then it hangs upside down, and I'm holding on, and then it comes back around, and it hangs upside down, and it finally flips around. I breathed a sigh of relief. I made it. I never have to do this again. Then it decided to go backwards. If I could have gotten that 53-year-old's attention, I'd have had him cut that ride off. By the time it was finishing going backwards, I was simply trying to retain my health status. I get off the ride. Elizabeth looks at me and says, Dad, are you all right? I looked at her friend Alexandra. I said, call your father. He's a doctor. So I survived, but I guess I don't know what the moral of that is. If you're over 50, don't ride the Kamikaze at the fair time this year. My colleagues have touched on several important issues, and I want to divert for a moment onto some critical foreign policy issues facing us. Last night I saw Colonel John Waters at a town meeting in Bellevue. The colonel is 97 years old. He flew 28 missions over England as a bomber pilot. That's an extraordinary number. A lot of people around him did not come back. And he said something that I wanted to repeat to you. He said in the 1930s, you could just sense, it was almost palpable, that something was not right. And then he said, but I've never been more worried about my country than I am now. All of you sense this as well, including your leaders in Washington. We are living in an ironic time of globalization when enhanced communications and travel, it's never been like this before, where people can interact on a moment's notice, where there should be this developing mutual understanding and the basis for trust, the building out of civil society and good government processes that uphold individual liberty. Never before have these ideals been so readily shared and accessible to people around the world, and yet it seems to be tearing itself apart, whether that is the Russians amassing troops on the border of Ukraine, whether or not that's manifesting itself with the chaotic conditions on our own border. And right now, as I speak, there's a place called Mount Sinjar in northwestern Iraq, where thousands of people are literally clinging to rocks and crevices with no water and no place to bury their dead, because they've fled there trying to escape this radical, fanatical movement, this barbaric, primitive movement of peoples that are calling themselves ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. Who could have imagined 2 months ago that this group would be able to sweep across large swaths of Iraq, the Iraqi army basically collapse, and they would be able to command such a presence there? Who would have thought? These people fly a black banner of death, and they are systematically committing a human genocide, wiping out ancient Christian populations, ancient Yazidi populations, another religious tradition that has survived and subsisted there. And while our attention is focused on other areas of the Middle East, the Israeli-Hamas conflict, as well as our own border attention, there is a genocide going on right now. It begs the question, what do we do? Now, there are some positions out there on one end that say, you know what? We've done the heavy lifting for 70 years. The role of superpower was cast upon us after World War II. We've tried to help build out economies and help build out governing structures, and they don't care. Let's pack it home. We're going to just do our own thing. An isolationist view. On the other side is an overprojection of power, which still sees the United States as the supervisor and provider of security for everyone. But I think somewhere in between, there is a place where we must land that sees us as a responsible partner in engagement with the international community, but also demanding those who have advanced their economies and who have created their own form of stability to start stepping up and providing some of the security needs for the rest of the world. On Friday, as Congressman Terry mentioned, we worked late in the night to try to get a border bill, because to many of us it would have just simply been unconscionable that we leave there without addressing this situation. But at the same time, we also passed a resolution that calls upon international intervention through the UN Security Council to try to stop this humanitarian catastrophe that is going on in Iraq. Somewhere in between isolationism and an overprojection of power is the responsible use of our values, of our perspective, of our economic might, and our security apparatuses in concert with others who have benefited greatly from our sacrifice. Secretary Gates, before he left the Defense Department, went over to NATO and basically wagged his finger and said, you're not going to free ride upon us anymore. Your unwillingness to contribute to your own troop strengths, to contribute your allocations to NATO, has left the circumstances in the world more and more vulnerable. And a former ambassador who has now left, before he left, told me, he said, America is the reference point, and this is a country we have tensions with. He said, you can walk away from that if you choose, but what will happen is there will be other reference points start to develop. Whether or not it's this barbarism in the Middle East, whether or not it's a new form of aggression from other superpowers, whether or not it's a new economic reality that takes hold. America has a responsibility to engage, but engage responsibly, I think somewhere between these two poles. Let me touch briefly on the border situation, and not to disappoint Senator Fisher, I'll get right to the charts. Are you watching the time? Because I'll lose track of it. I'm sorry. Nobody is? I'm in charge. I'm okay? All right, she's in charge. Let me say three quick things about the border. I think you have to do these three things: protect the border, protect the children, and prevent the problem. The bill that we actually passed in the House of Representatives provides about $700 million, not of new money, of reprogramming existing money. It fits within the current budget, to actually move National Guard troops to the border to assist Border Patrol as they've been diverted. They try to take appropriate care of the children who have come here and set up the proper, humane repatriation processes so they can be returned to their home country and reunited with their families. If this does not happen, more and more families, more and more children will continue to get the message that somehow it is okay to try to get in the United States. And as Senator Johans mentioned, what is happening? These children are beaten, their families are robbed by these human traffickers, these coyotes. Some of them are raped. It's unconscionable that we would let this happen and continue to send the message that this is okay, subjecting to more and more children to this form of abuse. The First Lady of Honduras said, we want our children back. The third component of this, preventing the problem, working directly with those countries to set up the humane repatriation processes to ensure the children are adequately protected. It costs us $250 to $800 a day to take care of these children. It costs, for a similar type of care, $10 a day in Central America. And once we reestablish some order on the border and get our immigration policy back in some sort of proper condition, then you can consider the just reasons that those who are fleeing credible fear and persecution or violence have for potential asylum here. But to do nothing simply subjects more and more children to this violence, and it's wrong. So I thought the House of Representatives did the responsible thing by laying down a marker as to how to intervene immediately to get the situation back under control. There is no compassion in chaos, and when you have disorder at your border, you undermine the ability of the country to have a good and just and vibrant immigration system, which should remain the hallmark of our immigration policy and law. Let me quickly turn to all of our good news, to the slides here, if we can get them back up. Federal spending this year, I'd like to give you an overview of this. This shows you where your money goes. It's $3.5 trillion, and if you look at this pie chart, it basically divides it up into where the money is spent. On the right-hand side is discretionary spending. That's defense, which is 16% of the budget. Non-defense discretionary is 15%. That's everything the government does other than health and retirement security programs, right there. Roads, parks, water projects, as Congressman Terry talked about, education, everything else falls into that non-defense discretionary spending, which is only 15% of the federal budget. Mandatory spending, another Washington word that means that whatever the demand is, the money goes out of the door. Social Security is 22%. Medicare is 16%. Medicaid, the program for the vulnerable, is 8%. Other forms of pension, supplemental security income for the disabled, and unemployment, some veterans' expenses are the next 17%. Net interest on the debt is the yellow area there, that's 6%. I put that up there because it's important. If we have an interest rate spike, everything that we're doing to get the fiscal situation back under control could be swamped by the payments that we owe on the debt that we have. If you go to the next slide, please. The money comes from primarily individual income taxes. The right-hand side there of the chart, the blue area, 50% of the revenues, which are $3 trillion this year. So you saw the first number, $3.5 trillion. Expenditures, revenues are $3 trillion. That's a budget deficit. Payroll tax is about 35%. Corporate income tax is 11%. Gift and excise tax is about 10%. Go to the historic overview if you could. Yeah. This looks at spending growth across the government of about the last 20 years. In 1990, up in the upper left-hand corner, it was $1.25 trillion. In the year 2000, it was 1.8 trillion. Now it's 3.5 trillion. You can see how rapidly the size of the federal government has grown. Deficits of 290, surplus of 200 in 2000. Now we're at a deficit of about 500. The debt, year after year piling up of deficit, leaves debts in 1990, 3 trillion, 6 trillion in 2000. Now we're at 17 trillion. Most of you here are engaged in businesses. You know what this means. More and more debt means that we have economic dislocations. First of all, it's unjust. It pushes this to children and grandchildren to pay for the way in which we are living now. Secondly, it sells the assets of the country overseas to foreign debt holders, to places like China. They make a lot of stuff, we buy the stuff, they have the cash, we run up debt, they buy the debt. It's dysfunctional marriage, but what that means is we're shifting our assets there. And where does it go? It goes to enriching a few and the buildup of their military. So we're all nervous about China throwing elbows in the Pacific. They're more aggressive posturing. So what's our first response? We better send more ships there. Rather than thinking about how our economic dislocation here is creating even national security problems. The third component of this is this debt is being monetized as the Federal Reserve is trying to soft land the economy, but basically printing money to do so. It creates inflationary pressures, particularly in commodity prices. That's a form of taxation that hits the poor the hardest, and those on fixed incomes, particularly as we have 0% return on person's savings what they've put aside their whole life. This is why it is so essential that your delegation continue to try to find the right balance between two things: the responsible delivery of smart and effective programs to keep you safe and to make sure that we have the opportunity for our society to flourish, whether that's economically or in civil society, doing all the things that we do in delivering you important public policies and public goods, balanced with not spending more than we have. All of us served in local government. What do we do back here? You figure out what taxes you need for the policies that you're going to provide, and you make a decision, and you set a little money aside, which is always hard to do, right, Mayor Butler? I remember the days. Mayor Byler. I remember the days. It's tough, but we've been able to avoid that kind of hard decision making in Washington because there's a flaw in our system of government. It allows us to overspend with impunity. But your delegation comes from Nebraska. We understand the essential value, again, of trying to act in a responsible way with the monies that we have and delivering of smart public policies. That's the commitment to all of us. I think I'm safe to say that. And we work very hard on this. We're not going to solve this overnight, but the good news is that we no longer have trillion-dollar budgets. $500 billion is a very big number, but it's not a trillion. Some tax code changes a year and a half ago, plus a little bit better economic growth, plus our efforts to appropriately reduce spending and make decisions on what's old and should be let go of versus what is innovative and new and is smart and is 21st century thinking. Not right versus left, not Democrat versus Republican, but what is new and innovative versus what was old and is now past. That's what we have to get to, and I think that's the core of Nebraska values. So thank you all so much for your public service. Thank you all so much for what you do in business, for taking risk, for caring for those under your authority. Thank you to the chambers who have pulled together this wonderful event. Pleasure to be with you this morning.
Thank you, Jeff. When I was first elected to the United States Senate, I was so excited. I was going to get to Washington. We were going to turn this economy around. We were going to grow jobs. And in order to do that, of course, we had to address those burdensome regulations. We were going to reform the tax code. It just made sense. We have to step up. We have to reform the tax code especially. You folks know that. The United States has the highest corporate tax rate, the highest business rate among our trading partners at 35%. We're hearing about our companies who are looking at moving their headquarters elsewhere for benefits. Ireland, 12%. Think of what we could do to grow this economy and grow jobs if we could have a corporate tax rate of 25, 24%. Hopefully we will be able to do that in the coming year. We'll have an individual from Nebraska, Adrian Smith, Representative Smith, who serves on the Ways and Means Committee in the House. We all know what a powerful committee that is as well. And Adrian's job will be to get the thing together, where he'll have a Senate, hopefully, that he can work with, to bring really some true reform so we can change this economy and see growth for an economy that continues to struggle and struggle and struggle and struggle along. We can grow an economy and we can grow jobs and we can help families save money, save for their kids' education, pay their taxes, buy a house. And Adrian's the guy who's going to help us do it. Please help me to welcome Representative Adrian Smith.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Thank you, Senator Fisher, for the introduction. Obviously, I would say everyone pays taxes, but that isn't the case. That's one of our problems. I think we want to foster an environment economically where more people can afford to pay taxes. And so we're sifting through those. The complexity of the tax code obviously is a problem out in the economy. I never get lobbied from anyone saying that they endorse the full tax code in its current state. I do get lobbied by individuals or entities that want to keep certain parts, heavily lobbied, I would add. But the fact of the matter is 10,000 pages in the tax code is unacceptable. That in and of itself has a cost to it, to our economy, and I think ultimately opportunity. And actually, one of my colleagues said the other day, you know, that the tax code has 10,000 pages. That's more pages than the Bible, except that the tax code has no good news. And so as we do try to sort out what we can do to maintain or grow our economy, we want to pursue, I think, innovative approaches, but simplicity in our tax code, I think, can have huge dividends in the economy and ultimately addressing the debt and deficit. And we've heard this morning about the geopolitical aspects of our fiscal policy. And the weight on our economy right now is such a concern. And I don't want to repeat too much of what has been said already, but just to give a few details and specifics on this water issue, waters of the U.S. Back in the 70s when Congress passed the Clean Water Act, and who would vote against that, right? I think we all want clean water. It passed, I believe, pretty strongly, but Congress made sure that they certainly intended to put a cap on the power of the federal government, and over 80 times referenced navigable in the statute to make sure that the federal government was not reaching all the way into state and local government with local irrigation ditches, whatever smaller flows might exist. And so now we're seeing these agencies try to change that. And so we are working diligently to push back and really, I hope, focus on what the results could be. And I think they would not be good. You know, if you look at administrative actions against individuals and businesses compared to judicial actions, they're 10 times more frequent. It is 10 times more frequent that an agency, OSHA going after a business or EPA or these other agencies, have had 10 times the number of actions than the Department of Justice would use through the court system of enforcing the law and various things. And there are folks calling the agencies the fourth branch of government. And I have to agree, and especially when we see the unintended actions. The Endangered Species Act passed the House in 1972 on nearly a unanimous vote. I think there were 5 or 6 members who voted no. I have a hard time thinking that all of those members of Congress back in the 70s would ever think that the Endangered Species Act would stand in the way of irrigators in California, and we've seen that here in Nebraska too. And these are the unintended consequences, And it's especially discouraging when it is abundantly clear that Congress intended to limit the power of the federal government on the water issue by putting navigable in there. And now there is such a concerted effort by these agencies to undo that without a vote of Congress. I would imagine that presidents from both parties have had their hands slapped in terms of reaching too far with executive authority. I think right now we have the first time in history that Congress is being threatened that if we don't pass what the president wants us to pass, that he'll just go around us. And so it's frustrating as someone who's elected by the people to take their voice to Washington, and that there would be such a disregard. And I think it undermines our process. I think it leads to the polarization and division in our country that there would be such a disregard for the legislative branch of government. We can, in the legislative branch, we can get frustrated with what the court actions might be along the way as well, but we need to do everything we can to really uphold, I think, what our founders had in mind with how things work in Washington. The Senate is very different from the House, and you might observe that here on the stage. No, explain. No, it's ironically, you know, the Senate is supposed to be the most deliberative body in the world, and especially in contrast to the House. 435 members of the House, the rules are structured so that members of the House don't get to just make amendments all the time. And now traditionally the appropriations process, the 12 bills of the appropriations process, traditionally have been open to amendments. And so we've been working through that this summer on the House side, and I think we've passed more appropriations bills than in recent history. And yet on the Senate side, I think, are we still at zero? Zero appropriations bills even debated. Friends, this just won't work. And the American people are getting more and more frustrated. And so I count my blessings that I can be a member of a state delegation where we can communicate, we can share ideas. We may not agree on every single thing, but we can, by and large, look at what's good for Nebraska, what's good for America. And I look out over the audience here today and I see so many familiar faces, those of you who are in the trenches of our economy, proposing and maintaining opportunity for Nebraskans, and outside Nebraska too. And when I look at Nebraska in the world, trade is so important, and I'm glad that I have the opportunity to serve on the Trade Subcommittee of the Ways and Means Committee. I would add that the Ways and Means Committee is the longest lasting committee in the House. Just energy and commerce, it's kind of a new thing. And so nonetheless, we do have, I think, a great delegation where we can cover a lot of issues with all five of us, you know, both sides of the Capitol, and I'm just grateful to be a part. But we need your participation, and I don't have to tell you that here today. You've shown up. But I will tell you that as an example, and this is somewhat old news, but I know that when Senator Johans over on the Senate side proposed getting rid of that 1099 mandate that was included in Obamacare, he was accused of attempting to gut the health care bill. Now, if only that were true. But I think 7 or 8 times he proposed that. We had various efforts in the House as well. It was not until people all across America said, hey, this is what it means. This is the burden that it places on especially small businesses. I heard from an individual with out in central Nebraska with 5 restaurants. He said he would go from 4 1099 filings to over 260. I mean, these are actual situations. But I'm grateful that the American people spoke up, and actually that was changed thanks to Senator Johans and his colleagues over there on a very bipartisan basis. So it's your interest that makes a difference, and I'm happy to hear from all of you. I would encourage you to keep the communication coming. Again, I'm grateful. Thank you for being here, and just to quote that famous Nebraskan, get her done. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the delegation, I would again like to thank you all for being here. We appreciate your interest. We appreciate the suggestions that you give us throughout the year. And as Adrian said, I hope that you feel that you can have open communication with all of us. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you once again to our entire federal delegation. As I mentioned earlier, we have without question one of the most accessible delegations, also one of the most business friendly. As most of you know, the Nebraska Chamber of Commerce and Industry is the Nebraska affiliate of both the U.S. Chamber and the National Association of Manufacturers. Everybody you see before you today has an excellent voting record with both of those organizations, and we do owe them all a great debt of gratitude. Thank you all for being here. Okay, we're going to reload, if you will. If you would direct your attention to the screens, I believe right now, though, while we're doing that, and I'll ask the Senate candidates to go ahead and make their way up here. Leave them up here. We need 5. I'm going to sit up here. Where are they going to put me? We do have a brief message from the Secretary of Defense, another great Nebraskan, Chuck Hagel.
Some of you remember when dinosaurs roamed the earth a few years ago. I wish you all much continued success, and go Big Red.
Thank you to the Secretary of Defense, Chuck Hagel. This year's summit is really extra special. Joining us this morning are major candidates for Nebraska's open U.S. Senate seat, as well as the candidates for the open governor seat. In this candidate forum, we will begin with the Senate candidates. Each will be allowed up to 5 minutes to make introductory remarks and tell us why he is running. We will go in alphabetical order by last name. Following opening remarks, we will have a question and answer period, and we'll ask as many questions as time allows. We do have Jolene sitting down front here, and she's been given full authority to jerk you off if you go too long. So keep that in mind. The questions were composed prior to the event by staffs of the Lincoln Chamber and the Nebraska Chamber. All questions pertain to issues important to the Nebraska business community. Answers will be limited to 90 seconds per candidate per question, and again, those will be timed. The order of the candidates will alternate during the question period. At the conclusion of the Senate candidate session, candidates for governor then will replace the candidates for the Senate in the same procedure. We do have a couple of other comments. In interest of time, we're going to forego lengthy introductions of each of the candidates so that they'll have plenty of time to share their thoughts. In your programs, you do have websites for each of the candidates that have full biographical information and other information that they want to share with you. So out of respect then for the candidates, we also ask that no video or pictures be taken while the candidates are on stage unless you are a credentialed member of the press. We're very pleased to have with us all 4 candidates for the U.S. Senate as of today. I think there perhaps is another one that has submitted some signatures. We're not sure if that's been verified yet. But we have Dave Domina, Jim Jenkins, Ben Sass, and Todd Watson. So without further ado, we will start with the opening remarks, and we will begin with Dave Domina.
Thank you and good morning. I'll give you a little bit of biography. Cedar County, born in a midwife's home, went home to the farm, raised on the farm, had dirt of Nebraska and Cedar County soil under my fingers and in my ears for 17 years, and whenever I could after that. Talked to my brother who farms there this morning. Coleridge High School, it is no more. It's merged with Laurel now. The University of Nebraska, the University of Nebraska College of Law, the United States Army, I was an officer, and then practiced law in Norfolk from 1974 to 89 and in Omaha since. Along the way, I started some businesses, including 3 retail businesses in shopping centers. That means think them up, design them, choose a product, in a couple of instances buy a franchise, hire people, establish a payroll, buy an inventory, operate the business, sell it in each instance to the manager. Did the same thing with a grocery store. I've bought, sold, fed cattle, delivered calves, farrowed hogs, and been around a while. I've also drafted statutes and provisions of law that passed eventually into the state constitution. I've declared, or at least led the charge to declare statutes unconstitutional and challenged provisions of the Nebraska Constitution when it confronts the federal Constitution. I'm running for the United States Senate because you aren't. And like you for a long time, I suspect, I've said we really need to have people who aren't interested in a political agenda and who are interested in the welfare of the United States first and Nebraska second, because the United States created Nebraska, serve as candidates for public office. Last October, the government of the United States was shut down. I knew that the United States Senator to be elected has to take an oath, and that oath is to protect and defend the Constitution of this country. That cannot be done by being so partisan and so one-minded and so single-purposed as to support an effort to shut down the very government that Constitution creates. I stand against that proposition. I stand against the proposition that we should reward the bankers who brought us 2008 management and control of our Social Security system. That system belongs as it is in the hands of the government. It is not at risk. There are easy ways to fix it. We started to tax it 20 years ago, and when we did that, we reduced benefits and took the money we taxed and put them in the general treasury, robbing the trust fund. And no politician is talking about that consequence. I oppose making Medicare a voucher system. I'm not willing to tell my father, who farmed all his life, that when he runs out of vouchers, he can't go to the dermatologist anymore for more sunspots. And I'm unwilling to say that to your father, too. I'm a veteran. I won't balance the checkbook of the United States on the backs of people who have served or are serving. They made a deal with us and we with them. They've kept their promise, or they're keeping it, and we keep ours. If we made a bad deal, we change it for the future. We don't conduct ourselves like a bad Nebraska farmer who contracts to sell his corn at $6 in the spring and doesn't deliver because the market moves his way. I oppose financing our elections with money from outside the state, from sources that are absolutely and categorically committed to never again passing a farm or a nutrition bill. And I am certain the people of Nebraska agree with me on those points. I want to spend my last few minutes reflecting first that once upon a time, for a Chamber of Commerce, I was asked to be the spokesman to make an All-America City presentation. It went well. And to recall that then, like now, I realized that the one thing that is essential to commerce is that we make this decision. Shall we have commerce by market domination and too few players, or commerce by vibrant and effective markets with many, many, many players? Our overly concentrated market structure in the United States builds barriers to entry that adversely affect almost every person in this room. I've privately enforced antitrust laws. They need to be publicly enforced again. Market vibrance cannot return with a concentrated banking system and a system of market dominance that doesn't allow you and I and each of us to participate equally. You've heard comments about the tax system this morning. 7 federal taxes, taking the excise taxes as a category. That's about 1,400 sections. The rest favor people not in this room and are unfair to us. Those should be fixed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Domina. Next, please welcome Jim Jenkins.
Good morning, and thanks to the chamber groups for sponsoring this, and thanks to the candidates for engaging in our important democratic process. I'm Jim Jenkins, a fifth-generation Nebraskan from Callaway, Nebraska. Moved back to the state about 18 years ago after living in places like Boston, Chicago, and Columbus, Ohio. Had a great privilege to raise my family here. My wife, Juliana, who's with me today, and 2 of my children, Whitney and Peter. Have a third daughter over who's not able to be with me today, Haley. My campaign is inspired by Nebraska, by my parents who were a part of the greatest generation, who went through and lived through a depression, World War II, and scrambled hard to build our family farming and ranching operation near Callaway. I'm inspired by all of my friends and neighbors across Nebraska who have demonstrated to me time and time again how important it is that we work with one another, that we reach out to one another, that whatever challenge or crisis we face, that we come together. Nebraska is a state that has a record that we should look at and learn from in terms of dealing with the huge problems we're facing with our Congress and our federal government. I'm inspired by George Norris, who worked hard to take on special partisan interest groups when he created and helped create and lead on the unicameral. I'm inspired by Democrat Jim Exon, who always seemed to be able to find ways to work across party lines. And Senator, a guy that I would call a friend of mine, Mike Johans, once again, always felt welcome in his office, and Mike always seemed to be willing to focus on the solution and wasn't too worried about labels. Labels are really killing this country right now. Our Congress has an all-time approval rating at low at around 10%. It's dysfunctional, it's gridlocked, we're kicking the can down the road on almost every major issue, and this is causing uncertainty in our economy. Our country is indeed facing a political crisis, and that's why I'm running. I'm running because we can no longer afford to continue sending highly partisan political leaders who are not willing to reach across party lines. We need bridge builders. We need statesmen. We need people that truly are willing to put the country and Nebraska's interests first. I'm also running because I've had the great privilege since moving back to Nebraska to work from one end of this state to another on a number of business projects. I've been involved in local community service and statewide community service, and that service has inspired me because in not one single meeting did I ever sit down and we went around the table to find out what your party label was. Custer County, my home county, has been featured recently in the news for being one of the most progressive counties in the country. We've come out of the 1980s in very bad shape in this state and in our county, and somehow or other, by working together, we've been able to create the world's most dynamic agricultural economy. When I look at, and we're only 90 days, so I'll focus on some of the differences. I'm running as a nonpartisan, and the presumed front-runner in this race, Ben, is running as a partisan. I keep looking at Ben's positions across all of the different issues, whether it's immigration or tax reform or the budget, and I try to find out how he's going to be able to reach across party lines and build a consensus. Because at the end of the day, if you can't negotiate or unwilling to find consensus, this country is going to slowly slide down the economic ladder. It's critical. The single most important problem facing this country is Congress's inability and unwillingness to reach across to one another. I've heard from Nebraskans in the last 9 months, and I can tell you that they do not like this big money, outside, highly partisan special interest group campaign that is undermining the very faith that we have in our leaders. It's hurting our democracy. My candidacy gives people a chance to do something special here in Nebraska, to do something Nebraskan, which is to send a nonpartisan independent with a diverse Nebraska resume to the United States Congress, who will work first for Nebraska and also for the United States of America. Thank you. I hope you will look at my candidacy seriously, and thanks again for coming together this morning.
Thank you, Jim. Please welcome Ben Sass.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you, Wendy. Thanks to the Chamber and to NAM and to all of you for giving us a hearing. I am a 42-year-old non-politician. I've never run for anything before in my life, so I'll tell you a tiny little bit about me. Melissa and I, Melissa's my wife, are blessed to have 3 little kids, and we're raising them a mile from where I grew up between Fremont and North Bend. And life is great. I wasn't looking to run for anything this cycle. I'm a business turnaround guy by background, and I've spent the last 5 years as college president at Midland University in my hometown. And life is truly wonderful, except for those charts that Jeff Fortenberry put up this morning. I want to make fun of Jeff, but those charts are exactly what we need to be talking about, because fundamentally the reason I'm running for office is because I believe in the American dream. I believe and love Nebraska and the work ethic that we instill in our people. And I think we have a moral obligation to leave a country as great and free and opportunity-filled for the next generation as we were blessed to inherit from our grandparents, and we're not on a path to doing that. The bad news is we're on a pathway toward a Greek-style debt and decline crisis. When you look at the mandatory items on Jeff's charts, his pie charts, and the fact that only 15% of our budget goes to non-defense, non-discretionary, or non-mandatory spending issues, there are almost no choices really to be made in Congress until the really big choices are foisted upon us, probably by the debt and credit markets. Right now, the most commonly passed piece of legislation in our Congress are post office naming bills. There's a reason that happens, because there aren't a lot of choices for the Congress if we just allow everything to move forward on autopilot. That's the bad news. The good news is, as somebody who's never run for office before but spent 7 months living on a campaign bus, and ultimately we were blessed to be rewarded with 92 of 93 counties and 88 of those 92 counties by double-digit margins, average margin at 27%, because we lived an all town hall, all Nebraska, grassroots, common sense, conservative solutions tour for 7 months. The great news is all across this state, the people are far more serious than Washington, and the people are far more thoughtful than the national media give them credit for. When you travel our cities and our counties, everywhere you go, people still believe in American greatness. They just know that the meaning of America is bigger than federal programs. The meaning of America at its heart centers on the businesses that you create, the ways that you serve in your local communities, and not just in your for-profit entities, though obviously that, but also in civil society and mediating institutions and family as the building block of American life. The center of America really is right here at home in Nebraska, and we have a federalist system where our founders envisioned a world where we would so celebrate the private sector, and again, not just for-profit entities, but not-for-profit society, those things that are outside government compulsion and mandates, but the way that vibrant communities ultimately flourish, where real value is created, where jobs are created, not where politicians pretend that they create jobs. Our people reject the false choice of an excluded middle between the two political parties in Washington right now. Democrats who can regularly feel people's pain, genuinely empathize with them, but too often only propose one-size-fits-all, government-centric, Washington-centric solutions. And Republicans who too often respond as if we either don't care or we can't see the problems or we don't have any ideas for how to fix them. The American people, to quote a mechanic in Norfolk last week on the trail, the American people and the people of our great state, they don't care all that much in partisan labels. Jim's right about that. But we're fundamentally a conservative people. Conservatism is a way of life that says life is mostly lived in the local. The partisan bickering, I'm with Jim, that's not in the interest of our people. But the challenge is we need to tackle those bigger problems. And common sense solutions really do unite Nebraskans. Our wonderful unicameral tradition, our nonpartisanship in this state, has me as a Republican regularly recognizing that the Democrat you may argue some policy issue with today may coach your kid's Little League team this weekend, somebody that you'll be in the pew with on Sunday. And that kind of nonpartisan tradition is right, but we have to focus on bigger issues, and there are a lot of problems to solve, and I look forward to the time we get to spend today talking about that. I also want you to know that we have pledged that we are going to, over the next 93 days, 89 left in this race, we're going to revisit all 93 Nebraska counties. I don't think anybody has ever pounded the pavement on a grassroots campaign like we've run over the course of the last 7 months, and I just want to say thank you for all the advice that you've given and all the listening we've been able to do from you, because our family has grown a great deal over the privilege of being hosted in your communities and in your businesses, and we look forward to doing that again the next 90 days. Thanks.
Thank you, Ben. Please welcome Todd Watson.
Good morning. Quick bio on me. I'm a CPA, business owner in Lincoln. I own 2 businesses with 60 employees. One we started in 2009. We've grown to sell our services to over 28 states in the union. And I've also sold 2 businesses in the past. So I am business. I know how to make it run. The central theme of my message today is our foundational walls have fallen. Our political, economic, and spiritual foundations are broken. And it's going to take us as a collective to rebuild all of them. I like the Founding Fathers and Constitution too, but we ignore a lot of their advice. George Washington, independent president, said, "It is wise to restrain the party system, calling revenge natural to party dissension." And that's what we see. We have 2 ornery kids in the back seat. Like me and my brother, we're growing up. You need common sense in the middle to get them settled down so Dad can get the car back on the road and get down where we need to go. John Adams said, "The greatest evil to the Constitution is 2 parties." But do we ignore that advice from the Founding Fathers? I often get approached, why a third option? We have 2. Would you have been pro-slavery in the 1800s? We had Whigs and Democrats that were both pro-slavery. It took a Republican option to say we need anti-slavery. Today we have a different crisis. We have a party of spendaholics and a party of spend-a-lots. We have got to get our budget under control, and it's the paramount issue we need to come together and solve, and I'm ready to do it. 2, our financial foundations are broken. Our form of capitalism worked at our founding. Unfortunately, we changed our form of capitalism in 1913 through an act called the Federal Reserve, and history continues to repeat itself. The Federal Reserve was formed by banking institutions J.P. Morgan, oil institutions J.D. Rockefeller, and the dominant industries they controlled and created the Federal Reserve. We shifted the underlying debt of all our businesses from people. People used to invest in our businesses. They bought the bonds, our communities, and we rose together as the tide of business grew. But we yielded to these interest groups. Now the rise of tide with the underlying debt is to Wall Street. 70% of our assets are in the control of 0.2% of our people. This is the definition of a command economy. The Federal Reserve is not federal. It advocates no reserves, and it commands our economy, and worse yet, it keeps our poor down. We need to rise together. 3rd, our spiritual foundations are broken. George Washington said it is rightly impossible to govern a nation without God and the Bible. Harry Truman said this is a Christian nation. Our founding fathers were wise, though. They knew if I could coerce you in establishment, that does not work with people. But speaking free, exercising and expressing like I'm doing here was protected. And I'm not here to judge, and we need to end this judgment. But I'm here to encourage all of you to take that next step. If we can get a closer relationship with God, our neighbors, quit oppressing the poor, He can heal this land. And we need His blessing and healing. And I leave you with this story. Moses had 12 individuals on the side of the Jordan. He sent all 12 spies over to seek out the promised land. And they came back and they took a vote. They said, should we go or should we stay? And 2 said, we should go. The task is tough. The task is hard, but it is God's will for us to go take that land. And the 10 who wanted to be in the majority said, it's too tough. It's too hard. Our pasture land's good here. My families are a lot better than we were being treated in Egypt. Let's stay. Let's vote for what's popular and what wins. They died in the desert. The 2 who voted to go the tough route saw the promised land. Israel, our best enemy. We need to be up for the challenge. You need to own your vote and be true to your conscience, not for what you think's popular, the lesser of 2 evils. And I don't compromise on moral issues, constitutional issues, but civil issues, we have got to compromise and work together to fix this nation for the long term. Thank you.
Okay, as I mentioned before, we'll ask a few questions as time allows. We will alternate the order. Gentlemen, there are microphones below your chair. If you want to sit and answer them, that's fine. If you feel compelled to come to the microphone, do that as well. The time limit will still be in effect, regardless of how you choose. First question, rather simple. If you find yourself in the Senate 5 months from now, what will be your first legislative priority? And we'll start with Jim Jenkins.
Well, thank you. I'm running as a fiscal conservative. I'm a businessman. I'm an agricultural person. Agriculture is the #1 industry in the state. I'm very concerned specifically about our deficit. And unfortunately, Congress has continued to kick that can down the road. We went from a Simpson-Bowles bipartisan agreement, tried to get, when it failed, to be debated on the floor of Congress. We then went to the super committee and then on into the sequester. And of course, as a part of all that, we also experienced a government shutdown, the threat to default on the Treasury. What I'm suggesting is that we absolutely have to lay down the sword. We have to stop acting like 2 warring tribes, Democrats and Republicans have to understand that at the end of the day, we have to come together to negotiate a bipartisan deficit reduction plan. And there are a lot of them out there, not only Simpson-Bowles, but also Domenici-Revlin, Concord Coalition. And this is an area where you can see when you take a very hard right position, as my friend Ben has done, you end up going nowhere. You end up continuing to kick the can down the road. And so I'm calling on Democrats and Republicans to lay down the broadsword and come together and begin putting the country and the economy ahead of their own partisan self-interest.
The entitlement crisis is obviously the single most pressing fiscal and economic issue, and ultimately a moral issue that the nation faces. The first thing you have to do is stop making the problem worse by expanding the entitlement state in unfunded ways with fake math and budget gimmicks. And so obviously Obamacare, for all the reasons that it's impossible to implement from Washington, but also all of the regulatory uncertainty it creates for your businesses, needs to be repealed. But we need to recognize that the reason we got Obamacare is not just because Democrats are interested in Washington-centric solutions, but because Republicans propose nothing, and we need genuine health reform in this country. When the voters are given a false choice between Washington-centric solutions and no solutions, regularly nationally, we see that they will choose some solution. A bad idea beats no idea almost every time. We need genuine health care reform, which means that every family in Nebraska and in America should be free to buy the health plan that they want, not the one that Washington mandates, and it should go with them across job and geographic change. We need to remove the bias in the tax code that it makes it almost impossible for farmers, ranchers, and small business people to get the same access to health insurance that large employer groups get. If we put in place those common sense first step solutions for genuine health care reform, we could have a much broader conversation about health entitlements, which are the heart of the entitlement overpromising we've done as a nation.
Yeah, I'd echo combining those next 2 points. As we've talked in this debate, our combination of debt and unfunded liabilities is around $70 trillion. It affects everything: national security, business. It's the number one issue we have got to solve. I've taken the most aggressive position. It hasn't been popular, but it's about solving problems. I would delay Social Security and Medicare 3 years, somewhere between the age of 45 and 55, because no one has the guts to stand up and propose it. Now, we've got to build collaboration, but if we don't fix Social Security, Medicare, it's going to go defunct for our oldest generations. Then we've got to fix the budget. And again, I'm willing to compromise. I echo Jim. We're both fans of Simpson-Bowles. Obama and Paul Ryan, the leaders on both sides, rejected a plan that would have reduced our debt from 65% of GDP to 25% of GDP. Instead, we got this horrendous bill that did absolutely nothing. So we've got to get serious about it. The question is, you don't want to lose what you have tomorrow. The crisis is in the international standing of our financial instruments. And they're looking at Washington, inability to solve a problem, inability to cut a budget, inability to make a tough decision. It's eroding the power of our financial instruments. If we lose that, I don't care if you're in the warfare or welfare party, you're not going to get any of it. So we have got to move quickly on balancing our budget. Thank you.
Well, I'll do it this way. I think we grew up differently, the other candidates and me, because what I learned was that when you're asked a question, you have it in mind and you answer it specifically. And the specific question here is, on your first day in the United States Senate, what is your number one legislative priority? Now, that should be answerable with one sentence and one specific response. I will pick up, sponsor, and advance to the best of my ability the bill that Senator Carl Levin has introduced for 3 consecutive years to close the lowest hanging tax loophole fruit in the Internal Revenue Code and return to the people of the United States by doing so approximately $20 billion, which is $1 billion more than all of the taxpayers in Nebraska send to the United States in income tax each year?
Next question, we'll start with Ben Sass. Federal highway bills are a perennial battle over revenues. Obviously, in a state like Nebraska, the size of Nebraska, a good infrastructure is very important to our economy and allowing businesses to survive. What reforms would you consider to help stabilize federal highway funding?
I'll speak to the highway portion specifically, but first let's put it in context of the larger infrastructure issues facing us. In our primary, we had 5 good candidates and 4 were well funded, and so we had a lot of robust fora and debates. There was a broad set of conversations about the Constitution in our primary, and somehow bizarrely it ended up being reported in the media as if there are Democrats, there are Republicans, and there are people who are interested in the Constitution. That's not the way Nebraskans talk about it. We believe there are Democrats, there are Republicans, and the Constitution is what unites us. We believe that the federal government should do a very limited number of things, the constitutionally enumerated powers. It should be humble in our politics, but we should ultimately try to do those things very effectively. We're underinvesting in infrastructure in this country. There's no doubt about it, but that our transportation systems, our water systems, our energy systems are outdated, and we are underinvesting in transportation, in infrastructure in general, and in transportation and highway bills specifically. The challenge is around the funding sources. There is a one-way ratchet in Washington that regularly says we've got this problem, so let's raise taxes for this thing. And many of us believe that the problem isn't that we send too little money to Washington, but that Washington prioritizes too ineffectively. I'm for user pay models, and I can imagine many circumstances where we could tie direct revenue systems to more transportation funding, but not without having the larger conversation about the fact that Washington is not taxing us too little at this point. Washington needs to better prioritize and therefore prioritize transportation.
Yeah, good question. Have a lot in common with Ben on this issue. Infrastructure, if there's one area to spend on, this would be an area. It's well documented, our infrastructure is in disarray. And in particular, I know we're focused on roads, it's how we get a lot of our product to market, but I can tell you the locks are in disarray. We need improvements to our ports. This fundamentally drives our products to market around the world. So quicker, faster, cheaper usually wins. And so I think we need to look at infrastructure on a complete American basis and say, what's going to help our commerce succeed, get to markets around the world quicker, better, faster. That's kind of the criteria to look at. And so with that kind of as the framework of how we should judge things, we need to look at our highway system and say, how are we getting markets, people to where they need to go, quicker, faster, better. So, prioritizing our infrastructure, including, we've talked about trains and the new amounts of energy we found up north and getting them out west. And so there's just a lot of infrastructure needs. It's all about getting commodities to market quicker, faster, better. So that's the kind of the criteria you approach everything with. Thanks.
I want to be sure of the question, so I'm going to ask a question. Is the word in the question prioritize or is it stabilize? The word is stabilize. There have been no comments about stabilizing. So the question is, how should we stabilize funds for the highway trust program? Well, that requires that we have a stable source of income to the general treasury of the United States. And in order to have sufficient funds in the general treasury, we have to increase the nation's payroll. That means we have to repatriate jobs and increase compensation across the board. We use an income tax. The only way we can get more money is to have more income produced within the United States. Once we've done that, then we have a combination of a legislative and an engineering problem that involves prioritizing. We have to determine where the most unsafe bridges and roads are, fix those first, then the highest used, then the most needed for non-commercial use purposes. If it's about funding, We have to increase the revenue, and we have to do that by increasing our own internal income production. Easiest way to do that, bring our jobs home. Best way to do that, stop incentivizing their expatriation with some of the excess in the 9,838 section Internal Revenue Code.
We live in a state that is absolutely dependent on infrastructure. When you look at the history of Nebraska, whether it's the railroads, the roads, the bridges, the University of Nebraska, public power, irrigation, this state was built on infrastructure, and unfortunately, Congress has ignored infrastructure over the last 10 to 15 years to the point now that we have about a $2.5 to $3 trillion infrastructure deficit. Having traveled in some third world countries and seen the devastating effect of the lack of infrastructure, I can tell you this needs to be a priority. But one of the reasons we can't focus on it is because we have two parties who are unwilling to even take care of the most basic things. They can't come up with a budget, and they won't debate it and discuss it. For the last 40 years, we've only had 4 or 5 budgets passed on time. And because about half of the people in Congress have signed the Grover Norquist tax pledge, which effectively prevents them in engaging on any kind of good faith negotiation on how to fund projects, we have not seen any sort of tax reform since Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill did it many years ago. We have to demand that our political leaders stop the partisanship and put the country and Nebraska's interest ahead by addressing how we're going to fund and maintain our infrastructure.
I believe each of you were here when Congressman Fortenberry showed his slide presentation. Do you view our national debt and federal budget deficits as a critical issue? And if so, what would you specifically do to address them? And we'll start with Todd Watson.
Well, obviously, you've heard me speak on this a little bit. You know I'm pretty passionate about getting our deficit and ultimately our debt under control. I think it starts with understanding these parties cannot get along or can accomplish anything of cuts. So in general idea, I thought, let's take 7% off the board of everything. If we can get together as a body and say we can find 3% savings collectively, then we only need to cut about 4% off the rest of the programs. If we put the pressure on, I think we can come up with solutions on bills that do not make sense. But a general idea of saying everything's getting cut, no one wins, everyone loses a little bit, then let's get to the table and maybe we can keep the critical programs and find common ground for cuts. So again, it's starting the discussion. Ideas are great, but it takes camaraderie first. And let's have a starting point for a discussion and work together and solve this. And so let's just have a general discussion. That's kind of the approach. Thanks.
Folks, of course the budget is a major issue. Most of you here looking out at this room remember the 1980s, and you remember that debt on the American and the Nebraska farmers' back was a major issue. But the way to solve that problem then and the way to solve this problem now is not to spend all of our energy on the right side of the income statement or the right side of the balance sheet. This is not all about spending, and it's not all about debt. It's about assets and it's about income on the left side of both of those sheets. We have to have a way to generate more income in order to handle and get rid of our debt. You saw Congressman Fortenberry talk about entitlements and about the little bitty slice that can be manipulated. That reminds me of the hundreds of Nebraska farmers I helped in the 80s who couldn't control the interest rate, couldn't control the cost of seed or fuel, couldn't buy their tractors any cheaper. They had to make more money. They had to do it by marketing better. The United States can talk about waste, we can talk about spending, we always should. We've got to focus on positive growth, increasing our asset base, increasing our revenues and our income, and creating more opportunity. We can all agree we want to make more money. That idea unites us. Let's stop focusing on the right side of the balance sheet.
I have a very straightforward, hopefully common sense proposal and suggestion for our party leaders in Washington. Debate Simpson-Bowles. You spent a year and a half, millions of dollars. You came forward with a very across-the-board comprehensive proposal, but for some reason, even though it's a huge issue facing our economy, you won't debate it. Debate immigration and bring it up for a vote. Debate tax reform. Everyone in this room agrees that our tax system is way too complicated. We got $1.3 trillion worth of loopholes that we've jammed into our tax code. It's dragging our economy down. It's impacting the way we handle our federal budget in a very negative fashion. The fact of the matter is, one of my biggest problems with the way we go about doing things in Congress is we have no priorities. I would suggest we have a bipartisan policy group made up of both Republicans and Democrats and people from the White House to decide what the priorities should be, and one of those priorities should be to bring Simpson-Bowles to the floor of the House and the Senate and debate it.
The heart of the question was about debt, deficit, budget, and ultimately entitlement. So let's put this in a little bit of historical context. When JFK was president, 52% of the federal budget was spent on national security issues and foreign policy matters. 52%. 1% was spent on health entitlements. By the time President Reagan was president, defense was down to 30% of the budget, and health entitlements had grown to about 11. So we'd gone from a 50-to-1 defense to health ratio to a 3-to-1 defense to health ratio. Currently, under President Obama, health entitlements outdistance national security and defense issues 24 to 22% of the budget. A majority of our federal dollars now are going to health entitlements relative to defense. And when you look 10 to 15 years in the future on the Congressional Budget Office projections, which are romantically optimistic about how things will work out, they always overstate what the federal government's revenues will be. When you look 10 to 15 years into the future, Medicare, Medicaid, Obamacare, Social Security, and interest on the debt, 5 mandatory programs, will have crowded everything else out of the budget. We can all make lots of sound and fury, but ultimately, until there are real entitlement reform packages to be discussed, and the problem is overpromising, the problem is not a lack of revenue, it is not a lack of taxes. Until we have real entitlement reform proposals, we won't get to a place where your businesses can operate and create jobs without all the tax and regulatory uncertainty we face. We need real entitlement reform first.
Another issue is that of great importance to Nebraska and actually our entire nation is our national energy policy. What changes would you seek, if any, if elected, to our national energy policy? And we're back, we'll start with Dave Domino.
Well, folks, first of all, I would say this. I would not accept and would not tolerate a response that would say, well, let's just do all of the above. Let's just do all oil, all coal, all renewables. Let's just do all of the above. That sort of reminds me of my grandkids when they're being disciplined by my parents, saying to them, whatever, it's just blowing it off. It doesn't get to the issue at all. I think we have subsidized oil and fossil fuels long enough. I don't think they need any more subsidies. There's enough profit potential in those industries so they will operate just fine without being subsidized. We should stop that practice. We should redirect all of that money that is going to be spent on energy to renewables. We should do that in ways that would invigorate and grow Nebraska's economy and the economy of everywhere else. We can learn what our enterprising allies in Germany have done. They're producing 50% of their energy supply from wind and from solar energy, and much of it on the rooftops of their homes. That kind of program invigorates employment generates business opportunities, creates work in Nebraska and in the United States on a sustainable basis, gets us off a form of energy that the rest of the world and we know we cannot continue to use. We will run out. It is bad for the planet, and we do have climate change. It is a real issue. It's time to stop fossil fuels and turn our heads in a new direction.
I think we all understand that energy is absolutely a foundation to a great and growing economy. The challenge, of course, is how do we move away from fossil fuels that do indeed hurt the environment and have geopolitical issues attached with them, and how do we best invest in different forms of energy, and something that hasn't been talked about very much but is hugely important, and that is conservation. Our society has done a great job over the last 10 to 15 years, and this is particularly true in agriculture. Our conservation practices, the sustainability that we're doing up on my farm and ranch, we're probably 30 to 40% better than we were 10 to 15 years ago. So my view is that we have to not turn fossil fuels into the bad guy right at the moment. We need to understand that they're going to be a critical part of our economy for some period of time. I can also tell you, though, I'm very much a promoter of renewable energy. I think I'm the only candidate here that's been involved in ethanol, which is now an $8 billion industry in this state. If you notice, we don't have a lot of fossil fuel in this state, and I also was one of the first people to get involved in wind development in the state. So I believe that we need to focus on new sources of energy, conservation, and also appropriately facilitating the continued use of fossil fuels.
Let's start with the good news. We're incredibly blessed to be an energy-rich nation, and we should be celebrating the all-of-the-above potential of all of these different diverse energy sources. We have enough coal in this continent to power American homes for more than 250 years. We, of course, need to be moving toward cleaner coal, but we should start by celebrating this resource. Second of all, natural gas. There is a revolution happening with shale and fracking now that if 50 years in the future people look back at this moment, I think they'll stand in awe at how little attention our public conversation has had around this moment. 10 years ago, it was inconceivable to any so-called energy experts what the future of North American energy might look like. There was pessimism everywhere in any account you would take in academia or in the media about American energy. We now stand probably only 6 years away from being a net exporter of natural gas. We should celebrate ethanol and renewables. We should celebrate nuclear that can be permitted and done in a clean, safe, and effective way. But fundamentally, we need a national energy strategy before we just continue to grow the national energy federal bureaucracy. We have almost 100,000 employees connected to energy in Washington, D.C., and we have no coherent strategy. And so the administration moves by a none-of-the-above energy policy to just attack every source of energy that power your businesses. As Nebraska farmers and ranchers know well, 65% of the electricity in our state is coal originating, and this administration's unilateralist war on coal in the EPA is going to be economically incredibly damaging to this state, and we need to oppose unilateralism in the executive branch and promote and celebrate a comprehensive national energy strategy that does look at all of the above.
I'm going to take a different angle. The Constitution calls for ensuring domestic tranquility. I don't think we understand the complete cost that foreign oil has on our country. Our people abroad to protect, we say we're in 100 different lands. Let's be honest, we're there for oil. We have our military, we're losing sons and daughters fighting for foreign oil. I'm not talking about domestic. And so we need to be energy efficient at home, completely self-reliant, which includes oil. And I like Lamar Alexander's approach. It has to be cheaper and cleaner for it to get approved. If it fails cheaper, it doesn't happen. So we need to move to using domestic sources. I put a position paper out strongly for ethanol. but any alternative energy. I think wind, we need to explore storage. Storage is not there yet. And instead of giving it to companies, we need to invest in science. One of the duties called for by the Senate, investigate science. But we have so much potential here at home. We need to harvest it, and we need to get off of foreign oil, which causes terrorism. What if we put the cost of that into our oil? So again, it's not against oil, it's against foreign oil. Let's enhance domestic oil, and let's free up our lands to catch it so we don't have to fund things overseas we shouldn't be involved with. Thank you.
The multitude of issues that these gentlemen need to become educated on and formulate positions on is indeed mind-boggling. And I know this morning we're not able to cover every issue. We tried to focus on issues that we thought were greatest importance to the business sector of our economy. This time, though, I'm going to allow each of the candidates 90 seconds to do a closing on whatever they wish, and we'll start with Jim Jenkins.
Well, thank you, and thank you again for this forum. And it's critical, I think, that we have these kind of discussions to really understand where we're all at on the issues, and also what we would bring from an experience standpoint to the table. I'm frequently asked as a candidate about my positions on a variety of these issues, and of course I have developed positions on all of those issues, or most of the issues. But what I've said repeatedly is that unless we fix the broken political process, we cannot expect to move forward on any of these issues. When we go to Washington and you delay on immigration because there is a my way or highway approach on the far right wing of the parties, on the Republican Party, when you go to Bowles-Simpson or Simpson-Bowles and there's a right-wing approach that says we're not going to do all of the above, when you move on to tax reform and you sign Grover Norquist tax pledge that prevents you from impacting and engaging in debate, that lack of debate and discussion is absolutely preventing us from moving this country forward. And unless we, as citizens, stand up and point out that this excessive partisanship is indeed the major reason we have so much uncertainty coming out of Washington into our economy, until we deal with that issue, we're not going to be able to fully address the major issues facing the country. Thank you.
Thank you for giving us your time today, and thank you for all that you do to make Nebraska the good life. As I mentioned in the opening, I'm running for office because I'm a dad. I've got a 3-year-old boy and a 10 and 13-year-old daughters, and we've had an incredible year living on the bus and getting to know every county in this state and every sector of our vibrant and diverse economy. But the reason we decided to run after a lot of prayer and deliberation at our house last summer is because Melissa and I heard Ronald Reagan's words echoing in our head that in a republic, you're always only one generation away from the extinction of freedom. I don't think politics are the center of life. I think our 93 counties are the center of life. And I think people in Vermont and Oklahoma and California should think that same thing. And we need to recover the American confidence in the private sector and in the local. The best governance is the governance that governs closest to the people. The heart of American life is the jobs that you create and the communities that you build and the values that you pass on to your kids. And the vast majority of the policy issues in American life should be debated in the next conversation, in the debate between Ricketts and Hasselbrook, because almost all governance should happen there. Washington should do a limited number of things a lot more effectively. Washington must learn to prioritize the way you do at your businesses, and we're grateful for all the conversations we've had with Nebraskans for the last year and for the next 89 days. Looking forward to being back in your communities. Thanks for giving us a hearing.
Albert Einstein said, insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. 90% of us are fed up, yet 90% are probably considering one of the same options because they want to win. They want to be safe. You're going to have to change. Albert Einstein also said this, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. That's exactly what we're doing, putting these same parties back in charge. We're ready to provide bold leadership and go in a new direction. There's been a lot of talk on budget and income and expenses. Let's get to brass tacks. It's about improving the standard of living, purchasing power. We're doing quantitative easing like no tomorrow to inflate a GDP. It's phony baloney. We have people hurting without jobs. Do we have true business growth that we feel in our guts doing well? We don't. And it goes back to the Fed. In 1792, you could purchase the same loaf of bread for the same price in 1910. That dollar from 1913 has been eroded to 4 cents. Thomas Jefferson said, the greatest threat to our liberties are banking institutions, not standing armies. We have big government tyranny, we have banking tyranny, and both these institutions belong to the people. And I have faith in all of you here, as well as myself. We can build this country back, but it's going to take a different approach. Join me, learn about me, do your civic duty. We can get this done.
You know, folks, I'm making you an offer. I'm offering to represent you in Washington, D.C. It's up to you to decide who to hire. When the state was in trouble in 1983 with failed banks, it asked me to conduct the investigation. We put the bankers in jail, removed the politician, didn't bail out the banks, and didn't get the state in trouble. When we had someone violate our election laws and an impeachment was necessary, the legislature hired me and asked me to assist with removing that person from office. And that provision, that article of the Constitution worked. If I serve in the United States Senate, I would be the first person who has stood between a citizen of his state or hers and the death chamber since a senator from Maryland in the 1960s. I have been selected by persons in this room who assist with major expansions of your business to other states. It's been my privilege to do those things. I've written and tested laws, written and tested constitutional provisions, been in your courts, know what it means to worry about your welfare, understand how government works, and am not committed to a partisan agenda. I offer to do your work. I'm not begging to do it. It's up to you to decide whether you want to take my offer. Thank you.
Anyone willing to put themselves forward and run for public office certainly deserves our respect. Nebraska, I think, is very fortunate to have these 4 gentlemen that are willing to put themselves forward and serve in the United States Senate. Please, let's show our appreciation for their willingness not only to be here this morning, but to continue the debate and discussion on important issues throughout the next 89 days, and then serve our state in the Senate. Thank you. Okay, this does conclude our Senate portion of the candidate forum. We're going to invite the gubernatorial candidates to come forward, and we'll move right into that portion of it. Nebraskans are also fortunate to have 2 very distinguished gubernatorial candidates this year who are willing to serve in that capacity. Again, we will forego formal biographical introductions in interest of time and giving them more time to share their thoughts with you. I would again point you toward the program that has their websites listed so that you can research their biographical information. We will repeat the same routine as we did in the Senate forum. We will once again ask, in respect for the candidates, that no video or pictures be taken while the candidates are on stage unless you are a credentialed member of the press. Once again, we're using the alphabetical order by last name. And for an opening, at this time, we'll go do the 5-minute opening and then 90 seconds for questions again. At this time, I will invite Chuck Hasselbrook to come forward and open.
Well, thank you. I'm running for governor to get Nebraskans working together to build a better future in our state for ourselves, for our children, and our grandchildren, to strengthen our middle class, to strengthen our communities, and to work with you, business leaders, in creating good jobs and genuine opportunity for every Nebraskan. It's really been my life's work. I spent 36 years at the Center for Rural Affairs. I started at the bottom as a VISTA volunteer. I worked my way up and spent 17 years as the executive director. And there I learned something about managing a multi-million-dollar budget and making decisions like you every year about what good things we wouldn't do in order to balance the budget, knowing that scores of employees counted on me for their job. During those years, the Center for Rural Affairs helped 10,000 small businesses across this state by providing loans, training, and help putting together business plans. We grew to the nation's 9th largest SBA-funded microlender, and by far the nation's largest rural microlender. I spent 18 years on the University of Nebraska Board of Regents, and there I learned not only about managing a billion-dollar budget, but also about working across party lines. For all of those 18 years, I was the only Democrat on the board, and twice my colleagues elected me as chair of the board, and I got things done. I won increased financial aid for those students who prepared themselves for college but just didn't have the family income to pay the tuition. I won creation of a Rural Futures Institute to develop our rural economy. And I worked with my colleagues to develop things like Innovation Campus at Lincoln and move the medical center forward in Omaha in ways that are going to help grow our economy into the future. Now I'm running for governor, and I have 3 priorities I want to talk about today, and the first of those is to grow our economy. We must build an education system in Nebraska that is second to none in America, enabling every one of our people to gain the education and skills they need to succeed as employees, as employers, as entrepreneurs, and as citizens. There is no greater economic strength we can have in the 21st century. That means keeping our universities strong, but it also means starting a lot earlier, because we have many children in our state who start kindergarten already so far behind that the odds are against them ever succeeding in school. And every one of us has a stake in fixing that. Because if those kids can't succeed in school, in the long term, they're going to come back to cost us. They're not going to contribute to our state's prosperity. So I have a priority on expanding preschool and early childhood education. And we also need to ramp up job training in this state and do things like the schools in Grand Island and Omaha and Lincoln are doing to enable students in their junior year of high school, if they're not inclined toward a 4-year degree, to begin taking community college technical courses for dual credit. And I think the state can be a partner in that, for example, by helping those families that can't afford the tuition, helping their students participate in those dual credit programs, because the federal government won't help them if they're still in high school. I want to make our state one of the best states in America to be an entrepreneur and start a small business, because one of the best ways to keep our bright, energetic young people is to support them in pursuing their entrepreneurial dreams. And there are a whole new generation of small business opportunities out there today. There are opportunities associated with moving technology from our university laboratories to new business startups. And there are opportunities associated with going online to sell goods and services to the most lucrative markets all across our nation and the world. So I want to beef up our small business tax credits, increase support for small business financing, and remove regulatory barriers to small business. And finally, I want to develop our world-class renewable energy resources. You know, the Department of Energy says that Nebraska has the third greatest potential of any state in the Union to generate electricity from wind. But yet we're behind all of our neighbors. We rank in the 20s among the states for wind development. And that reflects a lack of leadership. And I'm going to provide that leadership. And I'll start by working with private transmission companies to develop the transmission for us to become a major exporter of wind-generated electricity. We're the nation's second leading ethanol producer, but we're behind our neighboring states in supporting our ethanol industry by developing our local markets through blender pumps and even using E15 in our state fleet. So I'll beef up our support for marketing locally our own ethanol. And finally, I'll bring together a task force of farmers and business people, scientists, environmentalists, and others to develop a strategy for Nebraska to remain a leader in biofuel production as we move on to next generation biofuels. Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. Please welcome Pete Ricketts.
Well, I'd like to thank Barry and the Nebraska Chamber and the Lincoln Chamber for putting on this wonderful event again this year. And then also thank my lovely wife, Suzanne, without whose love and support, none of this would be possible for me. I'm running for governor, and I got to tell you, it's a tremendous amount of fun. It's a privilege to run here in the state. You know, last week I was able to be at the county fair in Custer County, and I got the chance to participate in a cow milking contest. And I want you to know I came in solidly in the middle of the pack. Now, there was a ringer in the group, Dee Fred. She's 82 years old. I think she's been milking for about 80 of those years, and she milked more than the rest of us combined. But that's part of the things you get to do when you're running for governor. County fairs, county parades, all that sort of thing. And I got to tell you, I'm tremendously excited about the opportunities we have here in Nebraska. By 2050, there will be 2 billion more people on the face of the earth. And because of rising standards of living, we'll have to produce 100% more food. 70% of that will have to come from productivity and innovation. Well, folks, we're an ag state, and we sit in the middle of the most productive, innovative country the world has ever seen. We are ideally situated to be able to take advantage of that. And that's why I'm so excited to run for governor, because I want to be a part of that. I want to help create that strategic plan, just like you would do in your business, to figure out how we do that. So I've been driving around the state, putting about 1,000 miles a week on the car, talking to folks about this issue. And the things that we need to do really fall into 3 broad topics. The first is tax reform, property tax, income tax relief. It's a barrier for our companies expanding here in the state. I was talking to a company in Kearney who said, you know, Pete, we just did a big expansion. But between your property taxes and your income taxes, you're too expensive, and we probably don't make that decision again. Well, we can't have our companies in the state saying that. So what I want to do is leverage my business experience. You know, I was the former chief operating officer at TD Ameritrade. When my father started that company, we had about a dozen people working there. When I joined, it was about 150. And today, TD Ameritrade employs 2,000 people here in Nebraska and 6,000 across the country. The way we were able to grow is we leveraged technology and best business practices to actually do a better job of delivering our services and do it at a lower cost. And we have that same opportunity at state government to create a culture of continuous improvement, to make government work better for the citizens of the state and do it at a lower cost. Because that's how we're going to get sustainable tax relief, by bringing down that growth of government and allowing our revenues to go up. The second thing we need to do is grow the economy. And in particular, we need to focus on agriculture and manufacturing, our 2 largest industry segments. Agriculture is the heart and soul of what we do here in Nebraska. It employs 25% of our people. And as Senator Deb Fisher mentioned, it drives our economy. I put together plans for both growing agriculture and manufacturing. I worked with my ag advisory team that has ag and business leaders from Alliance to Syracuse. Also, my running mate, Lieutenant Governor Levon Heidemann, is a farmer and a livestock producer. And in my plan, it talks about how we need to address property taxes, have water sustainability, and support value-added agriculture like livestock. We also need to improve educational outcomes for all of our kids. That's kind of the third bucket we need to focus on. And in particular, I want to focus on career and vocational training. You know, for so long in our public schools, we've said you have to be successful by going to college. But it's not true. You know, just last week, I was visiting Ash Grove Cement in Louisville. They were telling me that if you get a 2-year electrician's degree after high school and come work for them, you'll start at 22, 23 bucks an hour. And if you stay there a year and pass 2 tests, you'll be making $28 an hour. Now think about that. That's a 21-year-old making $56,000 a year plus full benefits. That's the start of a great career. And that's what we have to do, is make sure our young people are getting exposed to that opportunity early on. You know, when I was in junior high, everybody took industrial arts, but that's not true in my school district anymore. And we do a huge disservice to our kids if we don't expose them to the career opportunities available in the trades, to help them get those great paying jobs. And that's what I want to do, is put together that strategic plan like you would do in your businesses, to work with you here and the unicameral, to create a new spirit of collaboration, to work together, to figure out how we grow this state, unite Nebraska, east and west, urban and rural, to put together that plan. And that's why I'm here running for governor, and that's why I'm asking for your vote. Thank you very much.
I believe I'm correct in saying the next governor will be sworn in on the first day of the legislative session in January. That'll be January 7th, 2015. If you're elected, first question and reminder, you have already witnessed Jolene and her time restraints. If elected and you start your term on January the 7th, what will you see as the #1 issue of concern facing Nebraska? And we'll start with Pete Ricketts.
As I've been driving around the state, the #1 thing people talk to me about is property tax relief. That's got to be one of our top priorities as we address the next legislative session. You know, I was in West Point just a few weeks ago, and a farmer came up to me and showed me his tax assessment on 3 different properties. And they'd gone up 45, 45, and 48% in 1 year. Now think about that. If you're a farmer and your top 3 inputs are seed, fertilizer, and property taxes, that puts a huge squeeze on your operation. I was talking to a rancher in Shattering. Same thing, he showed me his profit and loss statement. Over 1/3 of his revenues were going to property taxes. It makes our producers uncompetitive. You know, we saw ag land valuations go up 30% last year. So I proposed a property tax relief plan that calls for taking valuations on ag land down from 75% to 65%, putting a cap on how fast those valuations can go up, putting more money into the property tax credit relief fund, and then finally curtailing the unfunded mandates that we do at the state that pushes down through either services or regulation, burdens on our county boards and our school boards, because that just puts more pressure on property taxes. We at the state can't find cost savings by making the counties do our work for us. One county commissioner told me he looked at his budget, 45% of the things that he was doing for the state. So that will be part of my job, to curtail those unfunded mandates, and that's why, again, making us competitive is so important on property taxes, and that's why it's going to be a top priority for me.
Well, like it or not, as governor, you have to solve the problems you're presented with. So I think the first issue I'm going to have to deal with is the crisis in our prison system. And, you know, there are a couple things we need to do there. And right now, we're in a crisis of overcrowding, and we've dealt with it the wrong way. We've been releasing dangerous criminals. At the same time, we're putting people in prison today who, in some cases, could be better treated, and we could be better ahead as a society to work with them to get their lives back on track. We're going to have to deal with that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use the existing statutory authority under state law to take away good time from anyone who's demonstrated by their behavior in prison that they're a risk to our loved ones and public health and safety if they're released, by setting a set of regulations that enables us to take away every day of their automatically granted good time. The current state law permits that. The current governor hasn't used it. I will. And then I will work with the legislature to expand drug courts, to expand mental health courts, to expand young adult courts, because they're far more effective and they're far more cost effective than prison for those folks who need to get their lives turned around and can and have the capacity to get their lives turned around, and we need to work together to make that happen. It will save us money and save us people.
As Wendy and I and other chamber officials meet with our members, who are indeed the employers of our great state, probably the biggest issue that comes forward is related to workforce. Many of our members indicate they'd hire more people today if they found them with the right skill sets. Skill sets seems to be a huge issue to the business community. What ideas do you have to enhance Nebraska's workforce to allow our economy to grow? And we'll start with Chuck Hess.
Well, first we have to build the pipeline of successful students who are prepared to take job training and enter a workforce. And that's why I'm such a proponent of improving early childhood education. Because we've got a lot of kids who, I'm a big fan of expanding technical education, but we have a lot of kids who can't read at a level at which they could advance in technical education, in which they can participate in an apprenticeship program. And so until we address that core problem, that we've got too many kids who aren't getting what they need at home and thus start kindergarten so far behind they can't succeed, we're not going to have the pipeline of young people who are prepared to be productive employees. The second thing is that I want the state to be a partner in supporting the new partnerships we're seeing between community colleges and high schools to get more of our young people onto a technical track beginning their junior year of high school. Grand Island's been a leader on this. A number of the cities are doing it. But we need more of it, because if young people don't get that opportunity in high school to start down a technical track, many of them never go on to community college. And so, again, I think the state can be a partner in enabling more schools to start those programs by maybe helping with some of the upfront cost and by enabling students from low-income families who wouldn't pay tuition in high school to enable them to participate by helping them with the tuition cost.
This is kind of fun in my primary. I only got to talk every 1 or 6 times up, so I get to go a lot more this time. It's kind of nice. You know, I mentioned in my opening remarks the importance of career and vocational training and how in my junior high everybody was required to take it, but now that's not true anymore. And again, we need to make sure that that's a policy across our entire school system, because there are great paying jobs out there. And that's one of the things I want to do as governor, is help promote that idea, working with our State Board of Education and the school districts to make sure that we're allowing for that sort of thing. I think we have to address testing in that aspect. But it starts with, I think, changing that culture, which so long has said you have to go to a 4-year degree to be successful, and if you can't, you kind of go to this career and technical training. And as we said, that's just not true. You know, in Grand Island, they've got a great example of a public-private partnership called the Career Pathways Institute. I took a tour of it. And what I like about it is that it makes it a Plan A. It's a competitive program. You have to apply to be able to get into it. And it really changes that dynamic. And I know that Lincoln's looking at that same sort of program. Kearney's doing something along those lines. Omaha's just starting to look at that. As governor, I want to continue to promote that, because there are great paying jobs all across the state. You know, Chief Industries in Grand Island regularly has 30 positions open for positions like welders. Companies simply can't find a machinist or electricians. Those are the kind of jobs that we want to make sure that we have the right trained workforce to be able to take. And as governor, that's one of the things I want to focus on in education.
One of the tools that Nebraska has used to level the playing field, if you will, and allow Nebraska to be competitive in a global market are some business incentives. Nebraska Advantage Act is probably one of the primary ones, and there are others. How important do you view business incentives to allow Nebraska to be competitive for both job and business investment. And we'll start with Pete Ricketts.
Yeah, business incentives are important. I was just talking to Cox Communications yesterday, and they were telling me that they moved jobs here from Oklahoma because of the incentive package that we have here in Nebraska. And the way I think about it is kind of the way we thought about it at Ameritrade when we were trying to open up accounts. We had an offer, 10 free trades, 50 free trades, open up the account. But we kept the clients because we had $10 trades, a fantastic website, and great customer service. And that's the same way we should think about incentives here in the state. We want to have incentives to get companies to take a look at us, to get them interested in the state. But we want to keep them here because we've got a great workforce, because we can create a low tax environment and have common sense regulation. And that's the way I want to think about incentives and think about what we can do with regard to small business as well. But when we create that even playing field, everybody will benefit. As I mentioned, we also want to have an idea of continuous improvement. So we should always go back and look at the incentives and see how they're working, see if they're functioning the way we intended to. But again, even states like Texas with zero income tax have an incentive program to draw people here. So let's see if we can't, again, working together with you, the business community, figure out what are the best incentives to not only encourage companies to move here, but to grow here. And of course, as someone who's been in a company that now employs 2,000 people here in Nebraska, I can testify from my personal experience. The greatest resource we have in the state to sell is our people. Because when you hire a Nebraskan, you're going to get somebody who's well-educated, works hard, loyal, and will help you grow your company. And that's something I'm excited to sell. Thanks.
Well, I believe business tax incentives are important. And I do support the incentives we have in place. Of course, all programs need to be subject to review and refinement. But I think we have to understand that having incentives for large employers to move here isn't the whole solution to economic development. And I think part of our problem in Nebraska is we've kind of treated small business and entrepreneurship as an afterthought in economic development. Now, I've worked on that. I helped pass I initiated, I conceived and wrote what's called the Nebraska Advantage Microenterprise Tax Credit. And it's really for those small startup companies that can go on to become the high-growth companies of the future, or maybe just a small company long into the future. But that tax credit's capped at $2 million for all the small businesses in the state combined. And that just simply makes it unworkable. So I want to beef up our small business tax and credits, to make those more comparable with what we have for businesses relocating here. And I'll also say this, we also need to pay attention to our workforce and education, because we can have the best business tax incentives in the world, and we need them, don't get me wrong. But I believe in the 21st century, the most important competitive advantage we can have as a state is a well-educated, a well-trained, and a highly motivated workforce. And that's why I think it's so important that we keep our eye on developing an education system that is second to none in America at preparing the next generation of employees and entrepreneurs.
When you take office in January, it is anticipated that the cash reserve in Nebraska will be somewhere perhaps above $700 million. I can assure you, having just returned from one of my national meetings, we are the envy of many, many states in this country. What do you believe, though, is the proper level of reserves for a state like Nebraska? And if, in fact, we're above that, what would you propose to do with any excess? And we'll start with John.
Well, I have a hard time putting my finger right on the proper level of reserve, but we're a bit above that right now. It's important to have a healthy cash reserve, because otherwise we go along, and the minute we hit a bump in the economy, we're looking around at what we're going to do to fix it. So it's important to have a healthy reserve. I believe we're above that right now. I grew up on a farm, and my dad was a conservative farmer, and we'd go along a lot of years without buying new equipment and without making long-term investments. But when we had a good year, that's when we made long-term investments. And I believe we need to take some of that surplus and make some of those long-term investments that will pay dividends in the long term. And my top priority for long-term investment in this state is early childhood education. Because we spend a lot of money in this state on things like public assistance and corrections and law enforcement. And if we did a better job of preparing kids to succeed in school, down the road, we could be spending less money on public assistance and on prisons, because kids who are succeeding in school don't join gangs. And kids who succeed in school generally don't end up on public assistance. So now is the time, when we have a surplus, to make those long-term investments that will pay dividends.
You know, as governor, you don't do anything really by yourself. Just like in business, you want to work collaboratively with your management teams, and I'll need to work collaboratively with the unicameral to kind of figure out what is that right level. You know, if you're going to ask me what, Pete, do you think is a ballpark, I think we probably do have too much in the cash reserve fund, that $500 million, for instance, might be more appropriate. But I think that's a conversation and dialogue that we have to have between the governor and the unicameral to kind of come up with what is that proper amount. And of course, we'll want to work to make sure that we've got a proper reserve, because we use that when economic times get tough, and they will get tough again. What do I think we should do with the excess, whatever we decide that should be? Well, I think that's where we want to invest in tax relief. Many of you probably saw that it was reported on Fox News that of a survey of all taxes, we came out third worst behind California and New York. If we're going to be competitive as a state, we have to have sustainable tax relief. And I think that cash reserve fund, that's money that we brought in from the citizens of the state, and that returning it to the citizens of the state, they will know how to use that to help grow the economy. Because when we can start cutting taxes, broaden the tax base, grow the economy, we'll be able to cut taxes again and get into a virtuous cycle of doing that. And that's what we have to focus on if we're really going to grow the state. And we have to be competitive on taxes to be able to do that. So again, this is going to be a dialogue. This is not going to be a mandate, and it's going to start with me sitting down with the folks in the unicameral.
I mentioned earlier this morning working with then Governor Johannes on a number of trade missions. That's held true with Governor Heinemann as well. We do live in a global economy now, and many of the businesses seated before you, as well as our ag sector especially, do have to find global markets for the items or crops they produce. What do you see as your role in trying to enhance Nebraska's position in global markets and working to create new markets for our products?
95% of the world's consumers lie outside our borders. We have to go out there and get them. And so I'm a big believer in the way the governor can go out and help open those doors for our folks here in the state, especially in Asia. I think it's important to have the governor or lieutenant governor go open those doors for businesses here in the state to be able to do business. You look at the example of Lieutenant Governor Levon Heinemann last year was in Taiwan and Japan and helped sign a $470 million trade deal. I've dealt with mergers and acquisitions as well and have experience in negotiating those sort of things. So I think it's a key role for the governor to make sure that they're going along and opening up those trade missions, to make sure that you're doing the reverse trade missions to bring people here to see what a great job our producers do. I want to work with the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Economic Development, to make sure that we've got a good synergy going there, that we're not missing any opportunities, or not leaving anybody out when we go on trade missions, regardless of the industry. I think agriculture provides a great opportunity, and manufacturing, our two biggest industries. So it will definitely be one of the priorities for my administration to work with the Lieutenant Governor and with you and agricultural producers across the state to make sure that we're targeting the right countries to open up the door, to get in there, establish those relationships, and make sure we're growing our markets, because that's one of the ways we're going to grow the state.
Well, as I made my opening comments, I said my reason for running, in part, is to create good jobs and genuine opportunity for every Nebraskan. And that means that I want to work with you to get that done. And one of the important roles that governors play just by showing up is traveling to foreign nations, demonstrating that the top leadership of the state is committed to developing trade relationships and making trade happen. Jobs, good jobs, and economic growth are a priority to me, so I will be there. And I'll do what has to be done to build those relationships overseas, to open up our markets. I think it's one of the most important things a governor does, and it's the same thing in economic development. You know, a governor has to be part of the team if we're recruiting a new employer to move to the state, or if we're recruiting a transmission company to build the transmission lines that enable us to export renewable electricity. In every case, it is important to those prospects that a governor show up and demonstrate by his or her presence that this project or this sale is important to our state. And I will be there. I'll be there with you. You can count on me.
When you take office in January, we have a goodly number of state senators in the audience today, and we appreciate your being here. When you take office in January, there's going to be a lot of new faces. I'm sure most of you know there'll be a minimum of 17 due to term limits that will be brand new out of the 49 in our unicameral. What efforts are you going to make to form a working relationship and a collaborative effort with the unicameral to move Nebraska's economy forward?
Well, I want to talk about some things I will do and some things I won't do. But upon taking office, I'm going to sit down with as many of the senators as I can, including new senators, to talk through, to hear their priorities, to hear their concerns, and to share my priorities and concerns. I mean, I've done a lot of work over the years. I've done a lot of work, I've done some lobbying on legislation in Washington. And, you know, if you're a good lobbyist, you spend more time listening than talking. Because you have to understand what people need and what their concerns are before you can address them. So I'm going to spend a lot of time with state legislators, getting to know them. You know, the governing majority in Nebraska, in our legislature, if you look back at this last session, was not one party or the other. The governing majority was a coalition of moderate Republicans and moderate Democrats. And I'm going to be looking across party lines to build those relationships and build those alliances and make it happen. But there's also some things I won't do. I mean, I'm not going to become the chief campaigner for Democratic candidates for the legislature, because we've seen what happens when you do that. When you do that, it poisons the water for working relationships. I mean, a governor kind of has to decide whether you want to govern or whether you want to do politics. I'm running because I want to govern. I want to build a better future in our state, and I want to make things happen. I'm going to focus on that. Tell you something else I won't do? I'm not going to tell the legislature who to elect as committee chairs and who to elect as the speaker. That's the business of the legislature. I believe if I leave it to them, it will help me build a more productive working relationship.
I intend to develop a relationship with each and every one of the 49 state senators. That's important because that's how you get things done. You know that from your businesses. And in fact, I've already started. You know, obviously there's the folks that are in the unicameral already that I know many of. Some of them are sitting here in the audience today. I've also been working as I've been on the campaign trail to get to know some of the people who are going to be coming into the unicameral. You know, for instance, there's John Keene from Hartwell. Smart guy, professor at Hastings University, a veterinarian. He's running unopposed, so I'm pretty sure he's going to be there next year. He's also on my ag advisory team. Kurt Friesen from Henderson. Again, somebody who is running unopposed, going to be there next year. I've known Kurt for years, and again, I make an effort to see him every time I'm out and about. You got Matt Williams from Gothenburg. Now, here's a gentleman who runs a bank and has just gotten done with the term as chairman of the American Bankers Association. Think about that. A guy who has comes from a small bank in the middle of Nebraska, convinced his peers to elect him to one of the most influential positions in a financial service association. So we've got a lot of talented people that are out there across the state running for unicameral. And as I've been making my way around the state, I've been taking the opportunity to get to know them and really start forming those relationships so that we can pull together to create that strategic plan. And I want all the senators to have an input in that, because they've got to be a part of the process to buy into it. And we can focus on this plan for how we grow Nebraska. We can focus in on the things that are really going to make a difference. And so establishing those relationships are going to be critical, and I've actually already started doing it.
Again, as I said in the senatorial forum, the number of issues that a governor has to face literally from day one is really immense. And this morning we've tried to just touch on a few of those that we felt to be of the highest importance. At this time, though, we are going to allow each candidate to use another 90 seconds at their own discretion and wrap up any other thoughts they'd like to share with you. So we will start with Pete Ricketts.
Well, again, thank you all for the opportunity to be here today. I very much appreciate it. I'm excited about the opportunities we have here in the state and the opportunity to be governor. We have so much potential and tremendous opportunity in front of us. The job of the governor is to help unleash that potential, because the single greatest asset we have in the state is you, our people. And as I mentioned before, that is a great asset we've got here. So I want to work with you, the unicameral, and folks all across the state to create that strategic plan for how we grow Nebraska, making sure that we're competitive on taxes and regulation, that we're growing the economy, especially agriculture and manufacturing, and that we're improving educational outcomes for all of our kids. That strategic plan will help us address the fundamental question we're facing here in Nebraska, which is, how do we grow the state? That's something you face in business every day. I know you understand that. And that's what we've got to address here in Nebraska. We've got to create those good and better paying jobs that will allow families to take care of themselves, make sure they got school clothes, can take the kids on a vacation or go to a movie, to create that quality of living all across the state that provides for access to health care, shopping, restaurants. All these things will help build a strong, vibrant, fundamentally sound economy that will allow our economy to grow and ultimately allow our families to take care of themselves. And that's what Nebraskans want, just an opportunity to be able to raise their families. So again, thank you very much, and I ask for your vote.
Well, we can build a better future in our state for our children and grandchildren. We can strengthen our communities and our middle class, and together we can create good jobs and genuine opportunity for all of our people. Now, to get that done, we need effective government and we need cost-effective government. And we talk a lot about cost-effective government, and in part that involves making cuts. And, you know, I spent 18 years on the Board of Regents. At least 3 times we went through profound down cycles in the state's economy and we made cuts. But it also involves making investments, because in every one of those down cycles, as we were making cuts, we were also making investments, because sometimes it's the dollar you don't spend today that costs you $10 down the road. And think of what it's cost us to cut mental health care services in this state to where we ended up with the state as the second highest percentage of our kids in foster care and one of the highest percentages in prison. And think of what we could save by investing today in early childhood education, in the long-term in prison costs and public assistance costs. You know, we have a great quality of life in Nebraska. We're one of the nation's best-kept secrets. And we enjoy that in part because our ancestors were willing to make far-sighted decisions, and they were willing to make investments at some sacrifice so that their children and grandchildren and their neighbors' children and grandchildren could have a better future. We owe it to them to do the same. That's why I'm running for governor, and that's why I ask for your support. Thank you.
Again, it's extremely admirable for anybody to put themselves forward and offer to serve our great state, especially in the capacity as governor. I think Nebraskans are very fortunate to have 2 respected and well-informed candidates running for governor, and I'm sure the discussion and the debate on the issues that are important to all of us will be both interesting and intense over the next 89 days. Please, once again, help me thank Chuck Hasselbrook and Pete Ricketts for attending this morning and for also offering to serve this state over the years to come. Okay, at this time, that will conclude the forum part of the program. Now would be a good time for you to stretch, perhaps use the restroom, check your emails, or just continue to network and get to know each other a little better. We're going to have about a 15-minute break. Please, if you will, respect the catering staff. They will be setting up, I think they've got a lot of it done already perhaps, setting up the lunch buffet in the back of the room. And as was mentioned earlier, we have a very informative and exciting speaker in Rob Engstrom from the U.S. Chamber that will be giving the keynote address during lunch. So stand at ease for a few minutes and enjoy each other's company, and we will be back for lunch.
It is my honor today to introduce to our keynote speaker, Rob Engstrom from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Rob has been a very good friend of mine for many years, and I'm really thankful we have folks like him at the U.S. Chamber fighting on our behalf. Excuse me. Rob is the senior VP and National Political Director at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, where he directs Chamber's political grassroots and election-related pursuits. He also manages the Chamber's Federation, which includes chambers, trade, and professional associations from across the country. He oversees the Committee of 100 and the Chamber's Institute for Organizational Management, and also the Chamber's accreditation program, of which we are a 5-star chamber accredited. Rob was recently recognized as one of the top 50 influencers excuse me, on the 2014 election cycle by Campaigns and Elections. He's very highly regarded. We really look to hear from him today on insights on the House and Senate races from across the country and get his expert predictions on what he expects to see in our November elections. Who gets elected on Capitol Hill affects us all, and nobody understands it better than Rob. So would you please help me welcome Rob Engstrom to the podium?
Wendy, thank you very much to you, to Barry, to Jamie, to Bruce. As Wendy mentioned, part of my job is, and the reason why I'm here is to talk about the political elections, but the job that I enjoy the most is managing relationships with the 1,600 state and local chambers across America that are members of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. We were founded 102 years ago by 600 state and local chambers from across America who said that the nation ought to have a national representative in Washington for the business community, but my job is to make sure that we are being a good partner and providing customer service for state and local chambers across America. So we are grateful for the partnership, the friendship. I've known both these folks for probably about 10 years, and they both serve on the Chamber of Commerce Committee of 100, which Wendy mentioned is the top, most prestigious appointment for chamber execs across the country. So on politics, on policy, and personally, I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here. Thank you very much. Also want to recognize other members of the Chamber Federation who are here. It's a great turnout. My grandfather used to actually fly B-52s in Vietnam, so I was walking around earlier. This is a wonderful venue. I know that the members of the congressional delegation have left, but I do want to brag on them for a moment. The Nebraska congressional delegation, 100% of the delegation has earned the Chamber's Spirit of Enterprise Award, and that means that if you vote with the U.S. Chamber a minimum of 70% of the time, then you get an award every single March to recognize that achievement. And I think that every single member of the delegation is above 90% in Nebraska, and so that's very different from where I was last week in Massachusetts, where I think that maybe none of them got above 30%. So we're going to try and change that this cycle. So I want to start by offering some remarks and some comments on the 2014 election, but I want to put it in perspective as it relates to the gridlock and the partisanship and the hyperbolic nature of politics in Washington contrasted to what's happening at the state level.
talk about what I think is most likely to happen in the House, also most likely to happen in the Senate in 2014, but then look over the horizon just a little bit into the first 100 days of the next president to provide that perspective so that we're not just looking at the world in the course of the next 89 days, although we are, but who's counting? We'll also look about what the opportunity might be beyond this polarization. So since 2006, 2008, and 2010, we've experienced 3 wave elections in a row. So the electorate is very, very volatile as it relates to both political parties, following President Bush during his term and now into President Obama. 2012 was essentially a status quo election. And so right now we have an opportunity after redistricting to, from our perspective, preserve and expand a pro-business majority in the House. 223 bills have been passed by the House on many of the issues that the folks that are running for governor and the folks that are running for Senate talked about, only to die in the United States Senate. So the goal is to protect and expand a majority in the United States House and then to reestablish and gain a pro-business majority in the United States Senate, and I'll talk about that. But unfortunately, for the course of the last 6 or 7 years, our members have faced an unprecedented threat from Washington. And a story that I often will use in situations like this is, we've done about 150 meetings over the course of the last 8 months with risk managers of companies of all sizes across America to seek their input on what are the policies that are going to help create certainty for those of you in this room and our members across the country. What are those policies? And then get their advice and counsel on the elections. And what I've heard consistently from many of my friends in the Democratic Party, interestingly, who are now running publicly traded companies or privately held firms, or folks who served as cabinet secretaries for President Clinton, they say something like this. When President Clinton would take a position that was contrary to the views of the business community, generally speaking, he would do that. He would communicate it in advance. He would do it in a narrow, finite period of time, allow the companies to plan around that perceived or real threat, and then he would find a way to make it better later, at least make you feel good about it later, so that the companies had certainty. And you had people like Newt Gingrich, who President Clinton didn't necessarily agree with all the time, my former boss, but they could work together on important items like welfare reform, and certainly during the internet boom to establish economic growth, which is what we all want. And these same Democrats and also Republicans in states all across the country have said that this administration fundamentally, on issues that go across the economy, like the financial markets, energy policy, health care, labor policy, just to get started, there has been a clear and a present threat across the economy ever since this president has been elected. And we don't get involved in presidential politics. We will get involved in presidential policy, but we get involved in earnest and aggressively in United States Senate races and House races where these same issues are in play. And so an analysis that demonstrates this, I think, most accurately, the National Journal, which is a nonpartisan publication in Washington, took a look at Congresses dating back to 1982. And in 1982, 90% of the members of the House, 90% of the members of the United States Senate were within 10 percentage points of the middle on issues concerning economic growth. Not partisan issues, immigration reform, transportation infrastructure, entitlements, energy policy, and the like, but 90% were within 10 percentage points of the middle. So every 2 years they do this analysis. Well, the last analysis that they did, there's exactly one member of the Senate that falls within 10 percentage points of the middle, and only 11 members of the House of Representatives where the same is true. So when you're talking about tackling some of the big problems and real challenges that people like Ben Sasse and others mention during their remarks and during the discussion, it's very hard to establish that certainty and to lead on issues that come closer to the middle if there isn't a middle that's left. And so these unprecedented threats that have been sustained since this president was elected, first in the legislative arena with Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid, and for 2 years they had the opportunity to pass Obamacare. They had the opportunity, though thankfully they failed on card check thanks to the good work of many folks here in this room. And then increasingly since the 2010 elections, that threat has manifested itself in the regulatory arena with the EPA and the NLRB and the rest of the alphabet soup that are making it hard for our members to do business. And so we are going to push back. We have scaled and grown the political program in a way to meet that threat, not on a partisan basis, but by measuring candidates on not what they say, but what they do and how they vote on the issues. And that's why we're going to run and execute the largest program in the history of the chamber. Let's look at the environment today with 89 days out. Right now, about 26% of the people in America think that things are on the right track. I always stop and sort of wonder who those people are. 64% on the wrong track. The president is tied almost exactly to, in terms of his approval rating, about exactly where the approval is for the health care law. So it's about 39 to 41% on average approval rating for the president and also approval rating for the health care law. What's interesting and notable is that for those Senate states, including Nebraska, who have competitive races, who have candidates that are well-established champions for American free enterprise, the approval rating for the president and also the health care law is around 34 to 36%. And so for those voters who are receiving messages on candidates' positions on those issues in a disproportionate way, the favorability rating of this president, as well as the health care law and its policies, particularly in regards to regulation, are even lower. So that creates an opportunity for us. But it also demonstrates the dichotomy, and the interesting dichotomy that's also manifesting itself right now in American politics. So when I led and talked about how Washington is broken, it's always broken, but this is particularly poignant, there are a number of states, including Nebraska, who are putting together common sense bipartisan plans to get things done on many of the issues that were discussed during the earlier parts of the program. And that's because, as we know, states are required constitutionally to balance their budgets. There is an increased pragmatism to be able to work with companies and work with firms and work with government in public-private partnerships to create that certainty and to grow jobs. In Washington, it's gone. As I mentioned, the National Journal Analysis, the middle is gone. And so our job is to help reestablish a governing middle, and to help the same way that Newt worked with President Clinton, the same way that Tip O'Neill from Massachusetts worked with President Reagan. Our job is to find those people that have the ability to win a political election, but also have the courage to govern and do something when they get there. And that means dealing with the issues that don't necessarily neatly fall along party lines. And so we're going to have an aggressive posture, an aggressive view on transportation and infrastructure funding. We support immigration reform. We have to find a way to deal with securing the border. We have to deal with the high end of the economy, with technology. And we also have to deal with the agriculture sector, particularly here in Nebraska, and find a way to deal with the people that are here. So these are tough problems. Also, during the Senate discussion, entitlement reform. That's something that energy exploration can help to solve. Pretty soon, these problems, particularly with regard to entitlements, become intractable problems. And so we're trying to find candidates with the ability to win and the courage to govern. So we've met with 150 candidates who are running for the House and running for the Senate. We've endorsed over 280 candidates, but we're going to put our money and our time and our energy and our effort into those candidates who are going to determine what a pro-business majority looks like in the House, and then find those races. We see 12 today in the Senate side that'll help determine what a pro-business majority looks like in that regard. So let me move to the House of Representatives and then talk about the Senate and then talk about the Chamber's program of work. And then I saved a short video because I know and recognize that I am the last speaker of the day. I thought that'd be a good way for us to end. On the House, there are only 40 competitive seats left in the House of Representatives. To give you a context of what that means, back to earlier what I said about three-wave elections, we invested in 95 competitive House races in the 2010 election. 95 races, almost a fourth of the House. We're down to 40 because of redistricting. So with redistricting last time, what happened was Republicans who were in safe districts wanted safer districts. Democrats who were in safe districts also wanted to avoid a November election. So we basically have a point where there's a 17-seat majority for Republicans. We're down to 40. So it's really hard to sort of change the balance one way or the other. Republicans are likely to gain somewhere between 8 and 10 seats. There are 17 seats that are viewed as truly competitive by the nonpartisan analysis at this point. What is interesting and notable is that almost half of those competitive seats, almost 20 of those seats, are found in only 3 states. And each of those states are deep blue states: California, Illinois, and New York. So if the races that fall, somewhere between 17 and 20, if half of the competitive seats in the Congress of the United States are going to be fought in the suburbs of Chicago, Illinois, Sacramento, California, upstate New York City also has a district that's competitive. If those races rise and fall only on Republican versus Democrat, that's not going to be a very good day for the Republican Party. What we're trying to do is take these seats specifically, and focus them on issues of economic growth. Not run ads, not endorse candidates because they're an R, because they're a D, but lay the predicate in the elections when we're spending money on the issues that matter most. And that means running ads in the Valley in California on water issues because that's what matters. Immigration reform because that's what matters. It means laying the predicate on transportation and infrastructure funding in the collar counties of Chicago because that's what matters most in that state and that district. The thing that I think has changed most in the 12 years since I've been at the U.S. Chamber is the degree to which state and local chambers right here in Nebraska and across America have increasingly been actively involved in federal policy, but also involved in federal politics in a way that respects the brand of the local or the state chamber, in a way that respects the boards of directors and the chairman of these state and local chambers. In the past, 10 years ago, when I would go and do a press conference for a Senate race or a House race in a targeted district, the local and the state chambers, for the most part, with limited exceptions, said, listen, that's a federal thing. You guys handle that, and we're going to focus on the governor's race, and we're going to focus on the local race. What's changed is that the federal policies from Washington are touching and impacting in a negative way, in our opinion, local chamber members and state chambers in a way that's unprecedented. As much, because Washington is frozen, we see great opportunity working with the Chamber Federation to gain success, to gain momentum by being a good partner and following the lead of state and local chambers who are working to pass bipartisan pieces of legislation on all the issues that I talked about and others to help be able to bring that back to Washington and say, we said that this is going to work, look what they're doing in Nebraska, and here are the results because of it. And so the Chamber Federation used to be a very neatly divided highway where we would take one lane in federal policy, state chambers do their thing, and local chambers would do theirs. Right now, when we stand at Senate press conferences, I was in Colorado yesterday doing 3 of them, we have state and local chamber representatives who stand at the podium and say, hey, listen, we don't get involved in federal politics formally, but I can tell you that the policies that are going to be decided, that the voters in Colorado in this instance, the issues that are going to be debated in this election have deep impacts on the growth patterns of the members of my chamber. So I'm here to talk about the need for transportation and infrastructure funding. I had the man that runs Uber, the car service, who is not necessarily a conservative Republican, who showed up at the event, and he said, listen, I'm not here to endorse anybody, but I'm here to tell you we're an emerging business, we're an emerging technology, and there aren't rules for our business. So we need a light regulatory structure. We need to be able to have the ability to come in and talk about what our new model is, and we want the opportunity to work with Democrats and Republicans because we can grow 250 jobs right here in Denver within the course of 6 weeks. And they were able to pass that bill. And the Uber gentlemen and the folks from the local chamber had the opportunity to make their point when it led the news in Denver last night, talking about the endorsement of Cory Gardner for the United States Senate, also a candidate who has the ability to win and also the courage to govern. Also spent a lot of time talking about immigration reform in each of those press conferences. So I did mention Massachusetts and their dismal score on the chamber rating. But to give you an example of how interesting the politics are this cycle, I mean, you saw what happened when Eric Cantor lost his election in the primary in Virginia, which no one saw coming. I will give you a precursor to an equal shock that I think is going to occur in the state of Massachusetts, on the North Shore of Boston in Massachusetts. This is a district, Massachusetts 6, that President Obama won by, I believe, 17 percentage points. It is a liberal district. It is a working class district. It is a union household district. And we've got a candidate, a Republican, who was the state Senate majority leader, who's up by 6 points in the polls right now. And he's sneaking up on an incumbent that's been there for 18 years. So even though that the universe of races has shrunk from, let's say, 95 or so in 2010 down to 40, if you look really and peel the onion into those 40 races, you find some very interesting things. Yes, it's suburban areas like Denver, Colorado. There's also a congressional race there. But it's deep blue places where the president had won by 17 percentage points before, where a Republican hasn't held office except for Scott Brown for a very long time. I think that provides us an opportunity for the free enterprise system to help lead this American recovery. Consider that even, and I'll get to the Senate here in a moment, but just consider this, looking over the horizon just a moment and stopping on this point. Even if Republicans are fortunate enough to secure a pro-business majority in the Senate and retain their gains in the House, which I believe that they will do, if you look forward to 2016, not to get ahead of ourselves, there are 24 Republican senators up for election and 10 Democrats. And all 10 Democrats are from blue states. And by the way, Harry Reid's also up in 2016. So even if Republicans get to 51, even if they're fortunate enough to get to 52, Math dictates that it's going to be exceptionally difficult to retain and hold that majority, particularly when you consider it's a presidential cycle, particularly when you consider that Republicans have to protect seats that are in presidential battleground states like Ohio, like New Hampshire, also Wisconsin, and also deep blue states as well. So what that provides us as we look into the first 100 days of the next president is we're likely to have divided government. We're likely to have a House that's Republican. We're going to be very interested in the composition of that majority, finding people that are pragmatic, conservative, but also have the courage to govern. And we're likely, because of math, things change, but we're likely, because of math, to have 40-some Republicans in the Senate. And so what we know from history is that big things that last, that get done in Washington, are always done on a bipartisan basis, because then both parties are invested. Both parties have cover. And so our play is play hard in the next 89 days, invest fully in candidates that fit those specific criteria, but then identify those conservative Democrats in the Senate, the few that are left, unfortunately, work with them on energy policy, financial services issues, and the others to help get to the 51 votes that you need with a president who hopefully values the free enterprise system, and use those 100 days to help fix this mess. And the reality is the pendulum often swings wildly. It does in the elections, but it ultimately always swings in terms of governing as well. And I think that that's really the play. That's the opportunity that we have. So in the House, 40 seats that are up, that are competitive, 17 seat majority right now. I think it's reasonable to assume that Republicans will net somewhere between an 8 and a 12 seat gain on top of that, which is about what they lost last time. Republicans lost 8 seats last time. If there's a mini wave, you could get as high as 15, but it's not going to go much further than that. On the Senate side, there are 3 or 4 places that we have to protect. The first is Senator McConnell in Kentucky. This is going to be the first race for United States Senate where it was a $100 million race. $100 million race for United States Senate. The ads have been running since, I think, 3 years ago. And so this is a place where you can't turn on your TV without ads going, one way or the other. So what matters is personality. What matters is local issues and impacts. President Clinton's in on the one side. All the Republican presidential hopefuls, including Rand Paul, are in on the other. And so that is a very interesting race. My home state of Georgia, some of you will remember Senator Sam Nunn. His daughter's running for the United States Senate. I've met with her. I've talked with her several times. She's an incredibly impressive person. She used to run George H.W. Bush's 1,000 Points of Light Foundation. The National Democrats have raised her almost $10 million already. And so that's going to be a competitive race, even though it's a red state, going to be a competitive race. And then in Nebraska, our interest is to follow the legacy of Senator Johans, to provide Senator Fisher a partner in supporting the free enterprise system. We're grateful for both of their service. We'll come back and make an announcement on another day with regard to what the board of directors plans to do in that race, but that's our interest, that's our goal, that's what we'll do, is value folks who value the free enterprise system and are willing to not demonize the free enterprise system, but recognize that it's always the engine that helps restore economic growth. And then on the opportunities side, on the Senate, there are 8 races that are truly competitive today, and then there are 2 more that might be. Republicans need a net of 6 seats. They're at 45 right now. They need to get to 51. It is possible that after all the dust settles, that the Senate is evenly balanced at 50-50. That means Joe Biden gets the deciding vote. That'll be entertaining for a lot of reasons, but I don't know necessarily it's going to be good for those of us in this room. But I think that Republicans have a good opportunity out of those 8 seats that are competitive. If they can net 6 and protect the seats that I reference, then they have a great opportunity to gain a majority back in the United States Senate. A couple that I would highlight, 3 that I would highlight quickly, Colorado and North Carolina. Both of these states are benefiting from, on the Democratic side, the infrastructure of the Obama machine. And so they have the best voter list in the country. They have the best operatives in the country. They have more money than they know what to do with. The Democrat incumbent in North Carolina has a $7.5 million cash advantage over the Republican. And that's because the president does a fundraiser, I think, every other hour to make sure that each of these folks are funded and have the money they need to get their message out. And so if you want to look, following the next 89 days, the top 2 or 3 races in the Senate where you can kind of get a sense of which way it's going to go, I would draw your attention to Colorado. I would draw your attention to North Carolina because they're going to be they're right within the margin of error and have been the entire year. And then also nearby in the state of Iowa, Joni Ernst is an incredible candidate. I honor her service to our country and the military. And then we have a great contrast here. We have Bruce Braley, who is the was for 6 years the president of the Iowa Trial Lawyers Association. He has one of the worst voting records. He's a congressman, one of the worst voting records with the U.S. Chamber and the House of Representatives. He made his money suing our members. We're going to make sure this is a high priority for us. We've already been in that race. In fact, Mitt Romney cut an ad for the U.S. Chamber in that race a week before the primary, and she exceeded the 35% threshold to make her way through. Obviously, it's also important because of Iowa. A lot of the presidential candidates and potential presidential candidates are all making their way through Iowa, also New Hampshire with Scott Brown, who's running for Senate in the state of New Hampshire. And so I would draw your attention to those 3 states to get a good sense of which way the Senate's going to go as we move ahead. So I'll finally talk briefly about the U.S. Chamber's program of work and how we plan to be effective and relevant in this election. And we've already spent over $20 million in Republican primaries and on behalf of Democrats who meet our criteria to help reestablish that governing middle. We've endorsed 280 candidates to this point, just shy of that, probably about another 50 to go. We've held 50 endorsement events across the country, like the ones in Colorado that we held yesterday. We have another 50 that are planned to push those local messages. The Chamber Federation, state and local chambers, have been part of 100% of those events to make sure that we're tailoring those messages to the local business community to drive success in the elections ultimately. And what's interesting is that if you look back even 6 years, the way that it used to work, not just for the chamber, but also for the unions and the environmentalists, is everybody would raise as much money as they possibly could. They'd wait until Labor Day when people started to pay attention, and then they'd spend all their money in the end and see what happens. And what's happened with redistricting, shrinking the map, what's happened with the advent of early voting. I mean, right now, if you think back to 2012, there were people that were voting in the presidential election before the first debate that was held on October 3rd. People were literally voting for president and for federal office, literally in late September. And so that changes the paradigm as it relates to when you want to try and reach voters and identify voters and figure out what they care about. Also, the primary season has been the most competitive primary season in American history. There have been more money spent. There have been more competitive campaigns than at any time. So instead of one day in November, I sometimes say I used to worry about one day in November where the difference between good and bad on business issues was decided. And right now, through the primary season, there were some Republican primaries, quite frankly, where the difference wasn't necessarily between good and bad on business issues. It was between sane and crazy. And you look at some of the things that were said in some of these elections. But we were successful through the primary season, backing Republicans and Democrats who had the ability to win and also had the courage to govern. We invested significant money in 12 races and were successful in 11 of them with the support and the help of state and local chambers across the country who were able to help us make sure that our messages resonated. And the final piece is that we were able to employ, I think successfully, although we've got a lot of learning to do, trusted messengers. And that means in Iowa, reaching out to Governor Romney, who cut the spot there. It means reaching out to Jeb Bush in the Florida 13 special election that was held in March. It means reaching out to, I'm from Georgia originally, former Heisman winner Herschel Walker cut a spot for us in the Georgia Senate race because he had an association with Jack Kingston, who unfortunately lost the runoff. But Herschel now he won the Heisman Trophy and won a national title, but he now owns 5 businesses. And he said, I'm not a political man. It's not what I do, but I know the difference between somebody that's going to help me and somebody who's not, so I'll cut an ad for you. And also Brett Favre in Mississippi in a primary election for the United States Senate. Brett Favre is far away from a political person. But he said, listen, this is about my state, and I feel like we're being embarrassed. And I don't like the things that are being said. And, I went to school at Southern Mississippi, and I went and played for the Packers, and I went and played for the Vikings. But you know what? I care about my state more. So tell me, I know who Thad Cochran is, but tell me about the distinctions, because I don't like some of the things that I'm hearing from Chris McDaniel. And so within 24 hours, we had a camera crew down on his farm cutting an ad that outside observers said made the difference in that particular race. And now, if Republicans are fortunate to secure a majority in the United States Senate, Thad Cochran is going to be the chairman of the Appropriations Committee for the state of Mississippi, which is incredibly reliant on federal dollars because of the port, but for also a variety of other reasons to include agriculture and the like. And so I wanted to provide a perspective on how we see the House, how we see the Senate, but also set the frame to let you know that we, along with you, as you have to plan in your businesses, as you have to plan in your chambers beyond 89 days, we're trying to take a lesson from you on that and look beyond the 89 days and look beyond the next poll and the next debate, although they're all very important, and say, how can we help establish certainty? Who are the candidates that are best positioned to help us do that? What are the opportunities for us to get involved in a competitive race where there is a compelling distinction on the issues that matter most to each of us? And then how can we put our full weight into those races and into those issues to ensure that the policies that are passed help create certainty for each of us? And I am somehow, after managing the political program at the Chamber, I'm still an optimist after the last 6 years. I'm an optimist because I've met with 150 of these candidates. I've spent time with people like my friend Ben Sass, and I know what they believe on issues on economic growth. And I know that they have the courage to govern and the ability to win, and we stand ready to work with them on the tough issues, not just the easy issues, not just saying no, that's easy. Rolling up the sleeves and getting it done is tough. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity to be with you. I'm grateful for the partnerships and the friendships that I have in this room. I found about 10 friends that I haven't seen in a while. It's great to be back. And at this time, I'd like to go ahead and roll that short video. Thank you very much.
Bill is passed. But we have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
In 2014, the Chamber will work to protect and expand a pro-business majority in the House and advance our position and our influence in the Senate.
I think Republicans owe the Chamber of Commerce and other people that went in there strong and hard.
In primaries and in general elections, we will support candidates who understand that business is not the problem, business is a part of the solution.
Jeb Bush is playing a starring role in a high-stakes Florida congressional election.
Bush appears in a new TV ad out today helping Republican David Jolly.
Dave's the best candidate to go to Congress, fight wasteful spending, and help create good jobs.
We won this for Pinellas County tonight.
We are going to win this battle. I hope you'll join me and strongly support Mike Simpson for Congress.
America needs principled leaders like Cory Gardner in the Senate. That's how we'll end gridlock.
I'm proud to stand with my friend Speaker Tillis and endorse him in his campaign for the United States Senate.
I can't be more proud of getting your support and recognition for what we've done.
Tillis's win comes in large part through massive outside spending from the Chamber of Commerce.
On June 24th, I encourage you to stand with a proven and respected leader.
In this campaign, most effective ad in the race probably was Chamber of Commerce using Brett Favre, the quarterback, to come out for Cochran. Creativity, money well spent.
The promise of America has always been that the older generation will leave to the young a stronger, better, and more hopeful country. The business community understands what's at stake, but it all comes down to leadership. Leadership that puts our country and our future first.
Thank you, Rob, for your inspiring comments. I think it becomes pretty obvious why the U.S. Chamber has become the leading voice for business in D.C. If you get a chance to go to D.C., and the U.S. Chamber headquarters is right across Lafayette Park from the White House. If you're there, you don't have any trouble finding it because there's this huge banner up there that says one word: jobs. And that's what it's all about. You're the people that create those jobs here in Nebraska, and the U.S. Chamber is without question the leading voice on your behalf in Washington, D.C. I do want to introduce Doug Luna as well, who's with traveling with Rob today. Doug is regional VP for the U.S. Chamber and a good friend of Nebraska. He comes down here frequently, and we do appreciate him being here as well. Rob, thank you again. Excellent job. We really do appreciate it. And now I would say the challenge is ours. It's been said numerous times, there's 89 days left in this election. There's a lot at stake here in Nebraska. Please continue to question the candidates to make sure they know the employer community is paying attention and engaged and listening to what they say and how it will affect your ability to continue to grow and prosper and create even additional economic opportunities here in Nebraska. Talk to your peers, those people that aren't here today. Share information with your employees on issues that are important. You can't tell your employees how to vote, wouldn't even suggest that, but you can share information with them on the important issues and how they affect your business opportunities for growth. Remember again, we have a lot of legislative races, 25 legislative races, 17 of which are open seat races. And they obviously have a tremendous impact on your business activity here in Nebraska as well. It'll be the first time in 10 years that we've elected a new governor. So Nebraska will be a focal point in a lot of regards. U.S. Senate seat open, governor seat open, at least 17 legislative seats open. And again, I commend anyone who is willing to put themselves forward to run for those offices. Again, I want to acknowledge Wendy and her entire staff, Bruce, Jamie, the whole staff, the State Chamber staff, Jamie and James and Ron and Roberta are here, I think. And we most of all want to thank you. Thank you for your support of the Lincoln Chamber of Commerce, the Nebraska Chamber of Commerce, and all local chambers. I believe there's a few others here today. It is with that support that we are able to represent you and carry that message of what it takes to continue to grow our economy to our elected officials here in Nebraska. Thank you for attending, and we are adjourned.